No, I didn't embezzle the company's money, I said, picking up the phone call from my father. The first thing I heard was his booming voice, making my ears ache. How on earth am I supposed to embezzle the company's money when I've retired? You're way off base, I calmly replied to my father, sensing his tone cooling somewhat. But I do know who the embezzler is, he shouted again, his flustered voice audible over the phone. Who is it? Name the criminal, my father demanded, his voice getting louder. The one who's been using the money is... I paused, mentioning the name. My father seemed caught off guard, completely speechless. My name is Henry Hawkins. I have been working in the accounting department of my father's company for 8 years now, I explained. I have a brother, Bob, who's often called Mr. Perfect due to his talent and looks. I've always been compared to Bob and lived in his shadow since childhood, I continued, reflecting on my life. Despite my efforts, my parents always favored Bob for his exceptional talent. Even when I earned achievements, they seemed overshadowed by Bob's presence. Growing up, I yearned for my parents' love, but it always seemed to elude me, I added, recounting the struggles. Eventually, I accepted that I would never match up to Bob's achievements. So, I tried to find solace in living a relatively free life away from their high expectations. However, my path was already decided. I had to join the family business. I sighed, explaining my predicament, not because of my abilities, but simply because I was a family member. Even if I was considered less competent than Bob, supporting the family business was mandatory. Initially, working in the accounting department was peaceful, I recalled, but when Bob took over as president, everything changed. It's a nuisance if you interfere in my management, he would say. I never intended to meddle. I only wanted what was best for the company. As I tried to speak up, I continued, frustration evident. Bob smirked and dismissed me, labeling me as incompetent. Incompetence gets in the way, Henry. So please leave. The phone call with my father left me conflicted. Between family expectations and my own aspirations, the tensions only seemed to grow. I was on the verge of saying a lot of things, but when I heard those words, my will to argue vanished completely. Reluctantly, I agreed to leave the company. Oh, I'm relieved you understand your own incompetence, Henry, Bob taunted as I packed my belongings. Being a CEO seems quite leisurely, doesn't it? You're the one who said I should leave, so once I do, never get involved with me again. Ha, of course I'm the one saying no to you. Don't come crying to me when you're in a financial pinch, Henry, Bob replied with a smirk. Leaving the company felt forced, but I wasn't attached to it. Instead, a strange relief washed over me knowing I could finally move on. Finding a new job took longer than expected. I suspected Bob had been pressuring related companies. Despite the difficulty and time it took, I eventually found a job that brought me satisfaction. It's not a big company, but the people here are warm and kind, I reflected. No one sees me as an inferior elder brother, as they did in my previous job. Have you gotten used to the work? A woman peered into my face as I focused on the computer, showing a kindly smile. She was Sonia Smith, the CEO's daughter of this company. Despite the stereotype of a CEO's daughter being arrogant and pampered, Sonia was nothing like that. Though clearly doted on by her father, she was considerate and caring, even showing concern for me, a newcomer. Yes, thanks to you, I replied with a smile, watching Sonia return to her seat. Thanks to Sonia's care, I began to feel more settled in my new role. I quickly bonded with my new colleagues, and within a few months of switching jobs, my relationship with Sonia had also grown deeper. We often have dinner at a nearby restaurant if we finish work at the same time, I noted, contrasting these interactions with the impersonal atmosphere at my father's company. It was a refreshing change. One day, enjoying my current work-life balance, my smartphone rang unexpectedly. I had finished work early and was thinking of relaxing at home when I saw a familiar name on the display, Bob. I hesitated, tempted not to answer, but knowing he'd persist, I reluctantly picked up. Hello, brother. You're slow to answer, aren't you? Managing well with that new job? Bob's voice was casual, as if lounging around even through the phone. What do you want? I cut to the chase, eager to end the call. Why would I call you someone I've supposedly cut ties with? Bob continued, his tone falsely calm, but I could sense his smugness. There's a woman named Sonia Smith at your company, isn't there? He asked abruptly. I met her at a party recently. She struck me as a good and modest lady. Thought I might get closer to her. I felt momentarily speechless. Bob's intentions were clear, though his voice feigned calmness, masking his underlying smirk disgustingly. I couldn't see his expression over the phone, but I could easily imagine it. "Don't tell me you're asking me to mediate between you two," I asked incredulously. "You're surprisingly perceptive, brother. That's helpful," Bob replied smoothly. I felt an impulsive urge to hang up right then, but somehow I held back, took a deep breath, and calmly opened my mouth. "Didn't you have a girlfriend who was the daughter of another company's president?" I probed. "I remember when I was working elsewhere, around the time you were becoming president, you were engaged to the daughter of a collaborating company." Though I hadn't spoken to her, I'd heard she suited Bob's personality well. As much as Bob was adored, I couldn't believe his father would approve of him having two girlfriends simultaneously. I continued, raising my concern. Bob's response was weary. "Oh, that woman. Her company's in financial trouble. I broke up with her to avoid any trouble for myself." It was a typical story for Bob. Despite being engaged, he cleanly severed ties due to her financial difficulties. Some might see it as a pragmatic approach to a political marriage, but it was something I couldn't support. "Even though we're in the same company, she's the president's daughter. She's not just anyone," I emphasized firmly. Casually chatting with Bob was easy, but mediating between him and Sonia was out of the question. Despite seeing each other daily and dining together several times a week, I foresaw trouble if I admitted this to Bob, so I politely declined, making up excuses. "Whoa, that makes sense. It's impossible for a regular employee like you, bro." Bob surprisingly accepted my refusal. The call ended somewhat smoothly that day, but soon after, I began receiving frequent calls from him. Each time he called, Bob insisted, "You're at the same company. You should find some common ground if you try." Finding it ridiculous, I denied his requests and hung up, growing increasingly annoyed with each repetitive call. Then calls from my father started coming, not about work, but about Bob. I thought I wasn't involved anymore. I muttered as my father explained, "Bob mentioned you know Miss Smith well. We need your help to deepen her relationship with Bob." As a child, I'd yearned for such validation from my parents, but now it only irked me. "I can't do that," I responded tersely, feeling only annoyance listening to my father's reasoning. I ended the call abruptly without saying more. One day, amidst the persistent calls from Bob and my parents, Sonia invited me to dinner after work. To be honest, I was grateful for Sonia's invitation, as it provided a welcome respite from the persistent calls from my parents. We decided to dine at our usual nearby restaurant. Once the food arrived, Sonia looked troubled as she began to speak. "Have you been in touch with your brother lately?" she asked, her concern evident. I had previously shared with Sonia about my family dynamics and why I had changed jobs. Despite knowing I wasn't on good terms with Bob, her sudden question left me uneasy. "Did my brother do something?" I inquired cautiously. "Well, yeah," Sonia admitted. "I guess there was an incident. Bob mentioned they met at a party." I felt a twinge of discomfort hearing this, but the immediate issue was Bob's persistent calls and the possibility he might be disrespecting Sonia. As I voiced my concern, Sonia peered intently at me. "Oh, what?" I asked, thrown off guard. "You don't look much like brothers, do you?" Sonia observed, her words stirring childhood memories. "The younger one is outstanding, but the older brother is not so much," she continued, reflecting on the differences between us. "They don't look like brothers at all." These words echoed sentiments I had heard repeatedly from various people, a reflection of the stark contrast between Bob's success and my more modest achievements. Unpleasant memories flashed through my mind, memories of similar comments from my parents and others. But I brushed them aside, focusing on Sonia's advice. "If you're open to advice," she suggested gently, "you should consider distancing yourself from Bob." I knew it wasn't my place to interfere, but I felt compelled to speak up. Since changing jobs, Sonia had been kind to me, and I didn't want her to be unhappy. That's why I spoke, but to my surprise, Sonia responded, "I feel the same way." She smiled warmly and took a sip of water. "I'm not particularly interested in getting close, but my father is concerned." "Hey, do you know a secret?" she whispered conspiratorially. I was taken aback, but I replied cautiously, "Is it related to what I know?" "Who knows? It might be a different story," she replied with a smug smile. Several weeks after our dinner together, my phone rang. It was my father. Our contacts had been sparse lately, so I assumed he was too busy to deal with me. "Hello, Dad. I can't mediate," I started, but before I could continue, he cut in sharply. That's not why I called today. Have you embezzled money from our company? His sudden accusation caught me off guard, and his yelling stunned my ears. I briefly considered shouting back, but I understood the gravity of the situation. How could I, having resigned, embezzle company money? That's a ridiculous accusation, I retorted, trying to keep my composure. Well, but my father's voice faltered, then calmed somewhat. I sighed heavily, steeling myself for what I had to say. But I know who the embezzler is. What? Who is it? My father's voice rose again, demanding the culprit's name. His authoritative tone intensified the ache in my ears, but I knew I couldn't delay any longer. It's Bob, I stated firmly. What did you say? When I uttered Bob's name, my father was completely speechless, caught off guard as if he hadn't anticipated this at all. It's not surprising he chose the younger son, Bob, who's more competent, to be the CEO of the company. I began, reflecting on the situation, but I never expected that Bob would be embezzling company funds. I had become aware of this while still working in the accounting department. Initially, the amounts were small, easily overlooked, but they grew bolder over time. Before I knew it, a substantial sum had been embezzled, and the only person who could have done it was Bob, now CEO. There's no future for the company at this rate, I thought grimly. It's on the brink of collapse. Bob must have realized that I knew about his embezzlement, which is why he forced me to quit abruptly. I continued, anticipating my father's disbelief. If you look at the accounting documents I left, it'll become clear. Do you want to see the evidence I've gathered? I'm prepared to sever ties, but I kept copies of everything for a reason. My father, who moments ago had said he couldn't believe it, fell silent at my words. But that's not all, I pressed on. The money he embezzled is being used for an affair with a married woman. A married woman? My father's voice shifted from surprise to utter exhaustion. This was news to me as well, I admitted. Sonia told me about it during one of our dinners together. The CEO, who cares deeply for his daughter, found out and is furious with Bob, especially since he's always around Sonia. At this rate, the company is headed towards bankruptcy, I concluded, knowing this was likely the first time my father was hearing the full extent of the situation. I heard a weak voice from my father, and I listened silently as he spoke. Can you help me out with some funds? Can you talk to the president of your company for me? If we can form a partnership with the Smith Group, we can turn our company around. He sounded as if he had just come up with a brilliant idea. In reality, I knew that partnering with the Smith Group was likely the only way to save our struggling company. Yet as my father asked for help over the phone for the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of indifference. I'm sorry, but I can't, I replied calmly. I've already severed ties with all of you. What? My father's voice rose in disbelief, but I ended the call before he could finish his sentence. After that, my father and Bob called me repeatedly, but I blocked their numbers, finally freeing myself from the constraints of my family. It felt even more liberating than I had imagined. In the end, Bob went bankrupt not long after. He was left with debts, and my parents, who had always treated me as incompetent, were now being pursued for repayment. Do you ever worry about your family? Sonia asked curiously as we shared a pasta dinner after work. Since that incident, I felt closer to Sonia than ever. We spent almost every day together now, and I knew I needed to gather courage soon. No, I'm fine, I replied with relief. I'm relieved to hear that, Sonia said with a smile. I'm really glad you're nothing like your brother. What do you mean by that? I asked, pausing to drink some water. It means you're not like him, Sonia replied with a mischievous grin. Realizing that her words no longer hurt me, I was pleasantly surprised. It's a secret, she laughed happily. Watching Sonia like that, I felt an even stronger desire to spend more time with her to protect my current company and Sonia. With that thought, I made a firm resolve to continue working hard.
My name's Deborah, and let me paint you a picture of my family. There's my mom, Karen, yeah, fitting name, I know. She's all about her career and freedom. Then there's my dad, Tom, who's about as useful as a screen door on a submarine when it comes to parenting. My sister, Jessica, is 14 years older than me and couldn't care less about my existence. I came into this world as an unwelcome surprise. Mom was 42 when she found out she was pregnant with me. She thought it was menopause at first. Guess the universe has a twisted sense of humor. When she finally dragged herself to the doctor, it was too late to take care of it, if you catch my drift. From what I'd pieced together over the years, it went something like this. "Tom, what the hell are we going to do?" Mom probably screeched, pacing around their bedroom. Dad, being the spineless wonder he is, probably just shrugged. "I don't know, Karen. Maybe we should talk to my dad?" And that's how Grandpa Joe got roped into this mess. He's loaded and lives in Canada, but he flew down to play peacemaker. "Karen, Tom, listen," he must have said, all calm and collected. "I know this isn't what you planned, but it's happening. I'll help you out financially. Just give this child a chance." Mom, being the career-obsessed woman she is, probably huffed and puffed before finally agreeing. "Fine. But I'm not letting this kid derail my life." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I, Deborah, came to be. Born premature, with a whole host of health problems, and into a family that saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. My early days were spent more in the hospital than at home. Mom couldn't be bothered to show up most of the time. It was Dad and Aunt Sarah who took turns keeping watch over my incubator. Aunt Sarah, now there's a saint if I ever met one. No kids or husband of her own, she latched onto me like a lifeline. While my own mother was probably off closing deals and climbing the corporate ladder, Aunt Sarah was there, holding my tiny hand through the incubator's holes, whispering words of encouragement. When I finally got to go home, Grandpa Joe swooped in again. Our house wasn't big enough for 2 kids, apparently. So, he bought us a new one. Growing up in that house was like living in a museum. Look, but don't touch. Don't make noise. Don't exist too loudly. I learned pretty damn quick that I wasn't part of the exhibit, just some unwanted artifact they couldn't get rid of. Mom and Dad were always working. When they weren't, they acted like I was some kind of leech, sucking the life out of them. We had a parade of nannies coming through the house. Some were nice, some weren't, but none of them stuck around long enough to matter. Jessica, my so-called sister, might as well have been a stranger living in the same house. 14 years is a hell of an age gap, and she made it clear she had no interest in playing big sister. I remember one time, I must have been about 6, I tried to hang out in her room while she was getting ready for college. "Jessica, can I watch you do your makeup?" I asked, peering around her doorframe. She barely glanced at me. "No, Deborah. I'm busy. Go play with your toys or something." "But I don't want to play alone," I whined. "Can't we do something together?" She slammed her mascara down on the dresser and whirled to face me. "Look, we're not friends, okay? I'm not here to entertain you. Go bother Mom or Dad." That was pretty much the extent of our sisterly bonding. Mom was even worse. Every day when she got home from work, it was the same routine. She'd walk in, kick off her heels, and make a beeline for the liquor cabinet. "Mom," I'd call out, excited to see her. "Can we play a game? Or read a story?" She'd pour herself a large glass of wine and sigh heavily. "For God's sake, Deborah. Can't you see I need some peace and quiet? Go to your room and play by yourself. You're old enough to entertain yourself." And Dad? He'd promised Mom he'd take care of me if she had me. What a joke that turned out to be. He was always too busy or too tired to spend time with me. His favorite phrase became, "Not now, Deborah." I remember overhearing them argue about it once. I was supposed to be in bed, but I'd snuck out to get a glass of water. "Tom, you promised you'd help with her," Mom hissed. "I can't do this all on my own." "What do you want from me, Karen?" Dad shot back. "I work all day too. I'm exhausted when I get home." She's always so needy. I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I'd heard enough to know where I stood in their eyes, a burden, an obligation, a mistake they were stuck with. After a while, I stopped trying. What was the point? I learned to entertain myself, to be quiet, to stay out of their way. I became a ghost in my own home, drifting from room to room, trying not to disturb the real family. The only bright spot in my life was Aunt Sarah. She lived nearby, and I started spending more and more time at her place. Weekends, holidays, any chance I got, really. With Aunt Sarah, I felt seen, heard, loved even. We'd spend hours doing puzzles, baking cookies, or just talking. She'd ask me about school, my friends, my hopes and dreams. Things my own parents never bothered with. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I was 14, minding my own business, trying to survive another day in the emotional wasteland I called home, when my parents dropped a bombshell on me. "Deborah," Mom said, her voice unusually chipper. "We have wonderful news. Your sister Jessica is getting married, and she's pregnant." Dad chimed in, grinning like an idiot. "We're going to be grandparents." I forced a smile, wondering why the hell they were telling me this like I should be jumping for joy. "That's great," I managed to say. "We're going to be very busy preparing for the wedding," Mom continued, not even noticing my lack of enthusiasm. "So, we want you to stay with your Aunt Sarah for a while." I blinked, processing their words. They wanted to ship me off? Because of a wedding? Part of me wanted to be hurt, but honestly, it was the best news I'd heard in years. "Sure," I said, trying not to sound too eager. "I'd love to stay with Aunt Sarah." They looked relieved, probably expecting me to put up a fight. Shows how little they knew me. I packed my bags faster than you could say unwanted child and practically skipped to Aunt Sarah's house. Months flew by. The wedding preparations were in full swing, but I couldn't care less. I was too busy enjoying my new life. Aunt Sarah and I would cook together, watch movies, go for walks in the park. She'd help me with my homework, listen to me ramble about my day at school, and actually seemed interested in what I had to say. Before I knew it, a week before Jessica's wedding rolled around. It was also my 15th birthday. That morning, I woke up to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Aunt Sarah singing off-key in the kitchen. I grinned, padding downstairs in my pajamas. "Happy birthday, my dear," Aunt Sarah exclaimed, pulling me into a bone-crushing hug. "I've got a surprise for you." She handed me a beautifully wrapped box. "It's from your grandfather, he sent it yesterday." I tore into the wrapping paper, my eyes widening as I revealed a brand new smartphone, the latest model, no less. I dialed Grandpa Joe's number, my heart racing with excitement. "Hello, birthday girl," his warm voice filled the line. "Do you like your present?" "Like it? Grandpa, I love it." "Thank you so much." We chatted for a bit, and then he asked the question I'd been dreading. "So, how did your parents congratulate you?" I hesitated, not wanting to admit the truth. "Oh, I haven't seen them yet. I was planning to go home soon, actually. I'm sure they'll say something then." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "I see. Well, why don't you do a live broadcast when you go? I'd love to share in the joy." With a mixture of hope and dread churning in my stomach, I made my way back to my parents' house. The walk felt both too long and too short. As I turned onto our street, I took a deep breath and started the live broadcast on my new phone. "Hey, Grandpa," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "I'm on my way to see Mom and Dad now. Thanks again for the awesome phone." I chatted away as I walked, filling the silence with babble about my morning with Aunt Sarah and how excited I was about my birthday. But as I approached our house, a sense of unease crept over me. "Well, here we are," I announced to the camera, climbing the front steps. I hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door. "Mom? Dad? I'm home." Silence greeted me. The house felt eerily quiet, almost abandoned. I frowned, panning the camera around the empty living room. Guess they're not down here," I muttered, more to myself than to Grandpa. "I'll check upstairs." I climbed the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. As I reached the top, I noticed something odd. The door to my room was closed, which was unusual. I always left it open when I wasn't home. "That's weird," I said, reaching for the doorknob. "My door's never closed." I pushed it open and froze. The room that greeted me was not my room. At least, not anymore. The walls, once a soft lavender, were now a pale blue. My posters were gone, replaced by cutesy animal prints. My bed had vanished, and in its place stood a white crib. "What the hell?" I gasped, stumbling backward. The phone nearly slipped from my grasp as I spun around, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This can't be right. This is my room. Just then, I heard a door open behind me. I whirled around to see my parents emerging from their bedroom, looking startled to see me. "Deborah?" Mom said, her eyes darting between me and the phone in my hand. "What are you doing here?" I barely registered her words, still reeling from the shock of my transformed room. "What happened to my room?" I demanded. "Why is it blue? Where's all my stuff?" Dad cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Well, you see, Deborah, we've decided to give this room to your sister's baby. Our first grandson." Mom nodded, a smile plastering itself across her face. "Yes, isn't it wonderful? Jessica's having a boy, the son your father's always dreamed of having. He'll be living here with us after the wedding." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But where am I supposed to sleep? Where's my stuff?" "Oh, we packed up your things," Dad said, waving his hand dismissively. "They're in boxes downstairs. You should take them with you when you leave. We don't want them cluttering up the place." I stared at them, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. "Leave? What do you mean, leave? This is my home." Mom's smile faltered for a moment before she forced it back into place. "Deborah, dear, you have to understand. With Jessica and her husband moving in, and the baby on the way, well, there's just no room for you here anymore." I stood there, frozen in disbelief, my mind reeling from what I'd just heard. Suddenly, a surge of anger welled up inside me, pushing through the shock. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "No, I won't leave. This is my home too. You can't just throw me out like I'm nothing." Mom's fake smile vanished, replaced by a look of irritation. "For heaven's sake, Deborah. Don't be difficult." "Difficult?" I spat back. "It's my birthday, and you're kicking me out. You didn't even remember, did you?" Dad rolled his eyes. "Your birthday? Is that what this tantrum is about? We don't have time for this nonsense." Their callousness hit me like a physical blow. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. "How can you be so cruel? I'm your daughter. A daughter we never wanted," Mom snapped, her composure finally cracking. "Do you have any idea how much you've cost us? How much attention you've demanded? We're exhausted, Deborah." Dad nodded, his face twisted with annoyance. "We didn't want a second child. You were a mistake, an accident. And now, we finally have a chance at the family we always wanted." Their words cut deep, each one a knife to my heart. I watched in stunned silence as they grabbed the bags they'd packed with my belongings and started shoving them out the front door. "There," Mom said, dusting off her hands. "Now take your things and go to your precious Aunt Sarah. She loves you so much, let her deal with you." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. "What are you waiting for?" Dad barked. "Get out. We have a wedding to prepare for, and we don't need you here complicating things." That's when the dam broke. Tears streamed down my face as the full weight of their rejection crashed over me. "How could you do this to me?" I sobbed. "I'm your child." "Stop it," Mom hissed, glancing nervously at the windows. "You're embarrassing us. The neighbors will hear." "Good," I shouted through my tears. "Let them hear. Let everyone know what kind of people you really are." Dad grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "That's enough," he growled, practically dragging me to the door. "Get out, now. And don't come back." With one final shove, I found myself on the front porch, my bags scattered around me. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I don't know how long I sat there, sobbing on the steps. Eventually, I gathered my things and started the long, miserable walk back to Aunt Sarah's. The bags felt impossibly heavy, weighed down by more than just my possessions. As I trudged along, sniffling and wiping my eyes, a familiar voice suddenly cut through my misery. "Deborah, can you hear me?" I jumped, looking around wildly before realizing the voice was coming from my phone. With a jolt of horror, I remembered the live broadcast. Grandpa had seen everything. "Grandpa?" I stammered, lifting the phone with trembling hands. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Look, we'll sort this out, I promise. For now, go to Sarah's. We'll see each other at the wedding in a few days, okay? Try to enjoy your birthday." Somehow, his words managed to calm me down a little. By the time I reached Aunt Sarah's, my tears had mostly subsided. She took one look at me, standing there with my bags and puffy eyes, and pulled me into a fierce hug. Aunt Sarah, bless her heart, insisted we celebrate my birthday properly. She let me invite a few friends over, baked a cake, and did her best to make the day special. The day of Jessica's wedding arrived. I hadn't been invited, of course, but Aunt Sarah insisted we go anyway. So there I was, decked out in my best dress, feeling like an imposter as we walked into the reception hall. I spotted Grandpa Joe almost immediately. He was sitting at a table near the front, his back ramrod straight, radiating an energy that made me nervous. Before we even had time to say hello, the newlyweds made their grand entrance. Jessica looked radiant in her white gown, beaming as she clung to her new husband's arm. Mom and Dad followed, pride evident in their faces, and I felt a pang in my chest. The reception progressed with toasts, dinner, and the usual festivities. As the congratulatory speeches began during the festive dinner, Grandpa Joe suddenly stood up. "I have something to say," he announced, his voice ringing out across the hall. Every head turned. Jessica and her groom looked confused. Mom and Dad went pale. Grandpa Joe marched to the front of the room, commandeering the microphone from the stunned best man. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I apologize for interrupting this joyous occasion, but there's a grave injustice that needs to be addressed." He then launched into a detailed account of how my parents had treated me. He spared no detail, from their resentment of my birth to the cruel way they'd kicked me out on my birthday. With each word, the guests' expressions changed from confusion to shock to outrage. Mom tried to interrupt, her face beat red. Jessica was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Her new husband looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. The guests were whispering among themselves, shooting scandalized looks at my parents. Grandpa turned to face my parents directly, his voice cold as ice. "So let me make this clear. I'm changing my will. Every cent I have will go to Sarah and Deborah. Tom, Karen, Jessica, you're cut off. Completely." The reception hall erupted into chaos. Mom let out a strangled cry, Dad's face turned an alarming shade of purple. Jessica wailed something about her ruined wedding. But Grandpa wasn't done. He walked over to where Aunt Sarah and I sat, shell-shocked by the spectacle. "Come on, girls," he said gently. "We're leaving. We don't need to stay where we're not wanted." In a daze, I stood up and followed him. As we walked towards the exit, I could feel every eye on me. Some looked sympathetic, others judgmental. I kept my gaze fixed on Grandpa's back, willing myself not to cry. The morning after the wedding disaster, I woke up to the sound of insistent knocking on Aunt Sarah's front door. Bleary-eyed and still processing the events of the previous day, I stumbled downstairs to find Mom and Dad on the porch, looking a strange mix of desperate and contrite. "Deborah, sweetie," Mom cooed, her voice sickeningly sweet. "We need to talk. We want you to come home, honey. We're so sorry about everything. We love you, we really do." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. "Love me? You kicked me out. You said I was a mistake. They launched into a litany of apologies and explanations, each one more pathetic than the last. But as I stood there, listening to their desperate pleas, a realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about me at all. This is about the inheritance, isn't it? I said, cutting off Dad mid-sentence. Their faces fell, confirming my suspicions. They didn't want me back, they wanted Grandpa's money. Get out, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I don't want to see either of you ever again. I slammed the door in their faces, leaning against it as I tried to calm my racing heart. But my parents weren't done. Over the next few days, they showed up repeatedly, each time more insistent than the last. They called, they sent emails, they even tried to rope in other family members to convince me. It all came to a head about a week after the wedding. I was home alone when I heard a commotion outside. To my horror, I saw Mom and Dad trying to force their way past Aunt Sarah, who had just returned from the grocery store. "She's our daughter," Dad was yelling. "You can't keep her from us." Something in me snapped. I'd had enough of their manipulation, their lies, their sudden concern for my well-being now that money was on the line. "Aunt Sarah," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want you to be my legal guardian." The words hung in the air for a moment. Then Aunt Sarah's face broke into a wide smile. "Oh, sweetie, I'd be honored." With Aunt Sarah's help, we contacted a lawyer the very next day. The process wasn't easy, there were forms to fill out, interviews to conduct, and a court hearing to attend. But through it all, I held on to one piece of evidence that I knew would make all the difference: the video from my ill-fated birthday visit home. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I felt sick to my stomach. My parents were there, of course, playing the role of concerned, loving parents to the hilt. But when the judge asked for evidence, and we played that video, the one where they kicked me out, where they told me I was unwanted, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed. I'll never forget the look on the judge's face as she watched my parents callously toss me aside. When the video ended, she turned to them, her expression hard. "In all my years on the bench," she said, "I've rarely seen such a clear case of parental neglect and emotional abuse." The ruling came swiftly after that. Aunt Sarah was granted full legal guardianship, and my parents' rights were terminated. As the gavel came down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was free of their toxic influence. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. Just when I thought the drama was finally over, Grandpa Joe called us over to his lawyer's office. As we sat in the plush leather chairs, surrounded by mahogany bookshelves and the smell of old paper, I couldn't help but feel nervous. "Deborah, Sarah," Grandpa began, his voice solemn but his eyes twinkling, "I want you both to know that I've made some changes to my will." He nodded to his lawyer, who pulled out a thick document. "As I promised at the wedding," Grandpa continued, "I've decided to leave my entire estate to you two. Tom and Karen are officially disinherited." I sat there, stunned. I knew Grandpa had threatened this at the wedding, but I never really believed he'd go through with it. As we left the lawyer's office, my head spinning with the implications of what had just happened, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "How could you do this to me?" she screeched as soon as I answered. "You've ruined everything." I pulled the phone away from my ear, wincing at her volume. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "You turned Grandpa against us. Now he's leaving everything to you and Aunt Sarah. It's not fair. I want my share too." I felt a flash of anger. After everything that had happened, after the way they'd all treated me, she had the nerve to demand money? "Look, Jessica," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I didn't ask for any of this. It was Grandpa's decision, not mine." "But you must have manipulated him somehow," she insisted. "You've always been jealous of me. This is your revenge, isn't it?" I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head before responding. "Jessica, I'm sorry you feel that way. But I had nothing to do with Grandpa's decision. If you want to change his mind, you'll have to talk to him yourself." "Maybe I will," she huffed. "And don't think this is over, Deborah. You can't just waltz in and steal what's rightfully ours. As she hung up, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but mostly just exhaustion. And then I decided to focus on my future. I threw myself into my studies, determined to ace my exams and get into a good college. Aunt Sarah helped me research schools, majors, and scholarship opportunities. Sure, my family situation was far from perfect. There would probably be more drama with Jessica, my parents, and the inheritance down the line. But for now, I had a loving home with Aunt Sarah and Grandpa Joe, a bright future ahead of me, and the strength to face whatever challenges came my way. I'm Catherine, and I was born into what you'd call a typical American family. My dad, Jack, was this ambitious guy who'd started his own paint and varnish company from scratch. Mom, Sarah, was your classic housewife, always busy with chores and gossip. And then there was my older brother, Tom, 5 years my senior and the apple of my mother's eye. Dad was hardly ever around, buried in work and drowning in loans he'd taken out to get his business off the ground. When he did show up, he'd lock himself in his office, muttering about invoices and profit margins. Mom, well, she made it clear from day one that Tom was her favorite. "Oh, Tommy, you're my joy, my everything," she'd coo, even when he came home reeking of cheap beer or with a black eye from another fight. Me? I was just there. An afterthought, really. Don't get me wrong, Dad loved me in his own way. He'd try to make up for his absence with gifts. For my 9th birthday, he gave me this clunky video camera. "Capture our family moments, sweetheart," he said with a tired smile. Little did he know how that camera would change everything. I remember this one Sunday when I was about 10. Dad had promised to take us to the park, but surprise, surprise, he got called into work. Mom lost it. "Jack, for Christ's sake. It's Sunday," she screamed, her face red with anger. "Your kids need you. I need you." I stood in the hallway, that damn camera in my hand, recording it all. They didn't even notice me. Dad's voice dropped to a whisper. "If you'd just help out with the business." Mom laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Help out? With your pipe dream? Wake up, Jack. You're drowning us in debt for a business that's going nowhere." I lowered the camera, my heart pounding. This wasn't the first fight I'd witnessed, but it was the worst. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew our family was falling apart. As the days went by, the tension in our house grew thicker. Dad spent more time at work, and when he was home, the silence between him and Mom was deafening. Tom started acting out more, coming home late, reeking of cigarettes, and God knows what else. One night, I woke up to the sound of breaking glass. I crept downstairs, camera in hand. It had become a sort of security blanket for me. Mom was standing in the kitchen, surrounded by shattered pieces of what used to be her favorite vase. "Mom?" I whispered. She turned to me, her eyes glazed over. "Go back to bed, Kath," she slurred. That's when I noticed the half-empty wine bottle on the counter. The next day, everything seemed normal again. Mom made pancakes, Dad read the newspaper, and Tom slouched over his cereal. But I knew better now. I knew that beneath the surface, our family was cracking like that vase. It was just another Tuesday when my world exploded. I was 10, Tom was 15, and neither of us had any clue what was about to hit us. I was in my room, fiddling with my camera, when I heard the front door slam. Dad's voice boomed through the house, angrier than I'd ever heard it. "Sarah, get down here now." Curious and scared, I crept to the top of the stairs, camera in hand. Force of habit, I guess. Mom sauntered into the living room, looking annoyed. "What's got your panties in a twist, Jack?" Dad's face was red, his hands shaking as he thrust a manila envelope at her. "Care to explain this?" I zoomed in on Mom's face. She looked different. Not scared or sorry, but almost relieved. "Well?" Dad demanded. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Mom tossed the papers aside and laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound that made me shiver. "What do you want me to say, Jack?" That I'm sorry? You want the truth? I've been cheating on you for years. And you know what? I enjoyed every minute of it. I gasped, almost dropping my camera. Dad looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Why, Sarah, why would you do this? Because you were never here, Jack. Mom exploded. You and your damn business. Did you really think I'd sit around waiting for you forever? I did it for us, Dad said weakly. For our family. Mom scoffed. Family? What family? We'd been broken for years, Jack. I was just the first one to admit it. The argument went on for hours. I recorded every painful minute of it, even though my arms ached and my eyes burned with unshed tears. They never noticed me standing there, too caught up in their own drama. The next few weeks were a blur. There were hushed phone calls, slammed doors, and more shouting matches than I could count. Tom retreated further into his own world, spending most of his time locked in his room. Finally, one night, Mom and Dad sat us down. Kids, Mom began. Your dad and I, we're getting a divorce. Catherine, sweetie, you'll be staying with your father. And Tom, you'll be coming with me. Tom shrugged, like he couldn't care less. But I saw the relief in his eyes. Dad was generous, he left the house to Mom, and also started paying child support for Tom. The move was quick and painless, at least physically. Our new apartment was small, nothing like the house we'd left behind. But it was ours, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. It wasn't easy, though. Dad worked longer hours than ever, trying to keep the business afloat and pay for everything. Some nights, I'd find him at the kitchen table, head in his hands, surrounded by bills. 5 years flew by in a blur of homework, part-time jobs, and watching Dad struggle to keep his business afloat. I was 15 when everything changed again, but this time, it was for the better. Her name was Rachel, and she waltzed into our lives like a whirlwind. I remember the day Dad introduced us. He had this goofy grin on his face, one I hadn't seen in years. Catherine, this is Rachel. She used to intern at the company, and now, well, we're seeing each other. Rachel smiled warmly. It's great to finally meet you, Catherine. Your dad talks about you all the time. I sized her up, ready to hate her on principle. But there was something about Rachel that made it impossible. She was genuine, kind, and she looked at Dad like he hung the moon. It didn't take long for Rachel to become a permanent fixture in our lives. She moved in a few months later, and suddenly, our tiny apartment felt like a home again. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Jack, my dad's willing to finance that new production line you've been dreaming about, Rachel said. He believes in you, Jack. We both do. I peeked around the corner to see Dad pull Rachel into a tight hug. What did I do to deserve you? He whispered. It hit me then. This was what love should look like. Not the bitter, resentful mess I'd grown up with, but this, support, trust, and genuine happiness. The next few years were like watching a rocket take off. With Rachel's connections and Dad's expertise, the business skyrocketed. The new paint line was a hit in Rachel's dad's hardware stores, and soon, orders were pouring in from all over the country. I'd catch Dad and Rachel working late into the night, heads bent over spreadsheets, arguing good-naturedly about expansion plans. But unlike the arguments I remembered from my childhood, these always ended with laughter and a kiss. Why don't you two just get married already? I asked one day over dinner. They shared a look and burst out laughing. Oh, sweetie, Rachel said, wiping tears from her eyes. Our love doesn't need a government stamp of approval. I rolled my eyes, but I got it. They were happy, and that's all that mattered. As for me, well, I was doing pretty well too. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make Dad proud. When I graduated college, there was no question about what I wanted to do next. And just like that, we became an unstoppable trio. Dad with his industry knowledge, Rachel with her business savvy, and me with fresh ideas from college. We were unstoppable. 10 years after Rachel came into our lives, Dad was rich. Like, private jet and vacation homes rich. It was surreal. Mom and Tom, well, that's a whole other can of worms. I hadn't spoken to either of them in years. Not since that disastrous Thanksgiving when Mom got drunk and called Rachel a home-wrecking whore. Tom supported her and called me a traitor. I'd left in tears that night, vowing never to subject myself to that again. Sometimes, I'd see Mom's name pop up in my phone, or get a random text from Tom asking for money. I always ignored them. It hurt, but I'd made my choice. I chose happiness, success, and love. Life has a cruel way of pulling the rug out from under you, just when everything seems perfect. For us, that moment came on a sunny Saturday in June. Dad had been talking about bungee jumping for weeks. "Life's too short to play it safe," he'd say, eyes twinkling with excitement. Rachel and I tried to talk him out of it, but you know how Dad was when he set his mind to something. The call came just after noon. I remember every excruciating detail. The trembling voice of the bungee instructor. The words "heart attack" and "didn't make it" echoing in my ears. The sound of Rachel's coffee mug shattering on the kitchen floor. It didn't feel real. Dad, gone? The man who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd weathered every storm life threw at him, taken down by a stupid bungee jump. The funeral was, well, it was a show, to put it bluntly. It seemed like half the city had turned up to pay their respects. Business partners in somber suits, employees with red-rimmed eyes, friends and relatives we hadn't seen in years. Dad would have hated all the fuss, but it warmed my heart to see how many lives he'd touched. And then Mom and Tom showed up. I almost didn't recognize them at first. Mom looked old, her face puffy and lined, eyes bloodshot. Tom slouched beside her, all muscle and attitude, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. They sat a few rows behind us, but their voices carried. "Well, Jack finally got what was coming to him," Mom's voice slurred. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. How dare they? How fucking dare they come here and disrespect Dad like this? But it got worse. You know, Mom's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow seemed louder than before. I heard his little girlfriend arranged the whole thing. Paid for the bungee jump herself. Probably knew his heart couldn't take it. Wanted to get her hands on his money, I bet. I couldn't take it anymore. I whirled around, my vision blurred with tears and rage. "Shut up," I hissed. "Just shut the hell up. How dare you come here and spread your poisonous lies?" Dad loved Rachel, and she loved him. This was a terrible accident, nothing more. So if you can't show some basic human decency and respect, then just leave. Nobody wants you here anyway. The church fell silent. All eyes were on us. Mom stood up, swaying slightly. "Come on, Tom, we're leaving. Let them have their little pity party. We'll see them at the will reading." The rest of the funeral passed in a haze of grief and anger. But as we stood by Dad's grave, watching the casket being lowered, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles. 2 weeks after we laid Dad to rest, we all gathered in Mr. Goldstein's office for the reading of the will. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rachel sat beside me, her face a mask of calm. Mom slouched in her chair, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Tom stood by the window, arms crossed, scowling at nothing in particular. Mr. Goldstein cleared his throat and began reading. "I, Jack Thompson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby." I tuned out the legal jargon, my heart pounding. And then, "To my daughter, Catherine, I leave all my worldly possessions, including all properties, bank accounts, and full ownership of Thompson Paint and Varnish Company." The room went deadly silent. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Mr. Goldstein continued, "To my ex-wife, Sarah, and my son, Thomas, I leave the sum of $20,000 each." "What?" Mom's shriek made us all jump. "This is bullshit. That business was my idea. I sacrificed everything for Jack and that goddamn company. I raised his children while he was off playing businessman. That company is rightfully mine. I glanced at Rachel. She sat there, calm as ever, but I could see the slight tremor in her hands. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, Dad built that company from nothing. You didn't even believe in him when he started. She rounded on me, eyes blazing. You ungrateful little brat. I should have known you'd side with him. You always were Daddy's little girl, weren't you? I took a deep breath. Look, I don't want to fight. If it'll make you feel better, I'll give you $100 grand. Just, please, let's end this here. Mom laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. $100 grand? You think you can buy me off that easily? No, sweetheart, I'm going to sue. I'm going to take every last penny that son of a bitch owed me. Enough. Mr. Goldstein's voice cut through the argument. The will is clear and legally binding. If you wish to contest it, Mrs. Thompson, you're welcome to do so through the proper legal channels. Now, if there's nothing else, I think we're done here. Mom stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Tom followed, but not before shooting me a look that could curdle milk. As Rachel and I left the office, I felt a weight settle on my shoulders. Dad's company, his legacy, it was all mine now. And apparently, so were his problems. After the disaster at Mr. Goldstein's office, Rachel and I retreated to Dad's, my penthouse. The silence was deafening as we both tried to process what had just happened. Rachel, I said, breaking the quiet. We need to talk about the business. I want you to have a part of it. 20%. Rachel's eyes widened in shock. Catherine, no, your father left it to you. It's yours. I shook my head. It's ours. You've invested so much in it, not just money, but time and energy. You helped build it into what it is today. It's only fair. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Before I knew it, she had engulfed me in a tight hug. Thank you, she whispered. Jack would be so proud of you. We signed the papers that afternoon. It felt right, like I was honoring Dad's memory and securing our future all at once. But of course, Mom couldn't let us have even this small victory. The lawsuit came 2 weeks later. Mom was demanding the entire business and most of Dad's property. Her lawyer threw around phrases like marital assets and unjust enrichment, but it all boiled down to one thing: she wanted what she thought Dad owed her. The next few months were a blur of court appearances, depositions, and sleepless nights. Rachel and I threw ourselves into running the company, determined not to let Mom's vendetta derail everything Dad had worked for. In the end, the judge rejected Mom's claims. The will stood. I thought that would be the end of it, but I should have known better. It was during the final hearing that Mom's lawyer dropped the bomb. Your Honor, we've just learned that Ms. Thompson has transferred a significant portion of the business to Rachel Carson, the deceased's girlfriend. In light of this new information, we'd like to file a separate suit against Ms. Carson. My heart sank. I glanced at Rachel, who had gone pale. On what grounds? The judge asked, sounding as tired as I felt. Alienation of affection, Your Honor. We have reason to believe Ms. Carson engaged in an affair with the deceased years ago, leading to the breakdown of my client's marriage. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was a lie, all of it. But as I looked at Mom's triumphant face, I realized she didn't care about the truth. She just wanted to hurt us, to take what she thought was hers. As we left the courthouse that day, reporters swarmed us, shoving microphones in our faces and shouting questions. Ms. Thompson, did you know about your father's affair? Ms. Carson, how long were you involved with Jack Thompson? Is it true you're giving away your inheritance to your father's mistress? Rachel grabbed my hand and pulled me through the crowd. No comment, she repeated, her voice steady even as I could feel her hand shaking in mine. Once we were safely in the car, I broke down. I'm so sorry, Rachel. This is all my fault. If I hadn't given you part of the company. Stop, Rachel said firmly. You did nothing wrong. Your mother, she's hurt and angry, and she's lashing out. But we're going to get through this. Together. I nodded, wiping my eyes. Together, I echoed. As our driver navigated through the city traffic, I couldn't help but wonder, how much more would we have to endure before this was over? And at what cost? The day of the trial arrived, and I felt like I was going to be sick. The idea of testifying against my own mother made my stomach churn, but I knew it was necessary. Rachel deserved justice, and Mom needed to face the consequences of her actions. As I sat in the witness stand, I could feel Mom's glare burning into me. But I focused on Rachel's encouraging smile and found the strength to speak. Your Honor, I began, my voice surprisingly steady, I have evidence that directly contradicts my mother's claims. The courtroom fell silent as I explained about the old videos I'd found. With shaking hands, I presented the tapes to the court. The first video played, showing a much younger version of my parents in our old living room. Mom's voice, slurred but clear, filled the courtroom. You want the truth, Jack? Fine. I've been cheating on you for years. And you know what? I don't regret it one bit. I couldn't look at Mom, but I heard her sharp intake of breath. The video continued, laying bare all of her infidelities and lies. Next, I presented the detective's report Dad had kept. It detailed Mom's affairs with dates, times, and photographic evidence. As you can see, Your Honor, I concluded, my mother's claims of my father having an affair with Rachel are completely false. In fact, it was my mother who was unfaithful throughout their marriage. The judge's face was grim as he reviewed the evidence. Mom's lawyer looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. When the verdict came, it was decisive. The judge not only dismissed Mom's case against Rachel, but also ordered her to pay all legal fees. Mom didn't take it well, she insulted Rachel and me, saying things you wouldn't expect to hear from your own mother. She continued her tirade, spewing profanities until the judge had no choice but to fine her for contempt of court. As the bailiffs escorted her out, she turned to me, her eyes blazing with hatred. This isn't over, Catherine. You'll regret this, I swear to God. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, Rachel burst into my office, her face pale. She handed me her phone. On the screen was Mom's Facebook page, filled with posts about our company. Thompson Paint is drowning in debt, one post screamed. Catherine Thompson is running it into the ground. Another claimed, inside source reveals, Catherine Thompson planning to flee to Mexico with company funds. We spent the next 48 hours in crisis mode. We issued statements to our employees and customers, assuring them of the company's financial stability. Our legal team drafted a cease and desist letter to Mom, threatening a libel lawsuit if she didn't retract her statements. To my surprise, it worked. Maybe Mom finally realized she'd gone too far, or maybe she just ran out of fight. Whatever the reason, she posted a retraction the next day. I, Sarah Thompson, hereby retract my previous statements regarding Thompson Paint and Varnish Company and its CEO, Catherine Thompson. My claims were unfounded and made in anger. I sincerely apologize for any confusion or distress my words may have caused. As I read her words, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. This woman, who had once been my mother, was now nothing more than a bitter stranger intent on destroying everything Dad had built. 2 months passed in relative peace. The company was thriving, and Rachel and I had settled into a comfortable routine. The wounds from the legal battles were slowly healing, and I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could move on. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I was heading to my car after a long day at the office. The parking lot was nearly empty, the setting sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. As I fumbled for my keys, a familiar voice made me freeze. Catherine? I turned slowly, hardly believing my eyes. There, looking small and worn, stood my mother. Mom? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? She shuffled her feet, not quite meeting my eyes. I've been thinking about your offer. The $100,000. Is that offer still on the table? I take it and leave you alone. For a moment, I was speechless. Then, to my own surprise, I started laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh, but a tired, incredulous one. Are you serious? I finally managed to say. After everything you put us through? The lawsuits, the slander, the lies? Mom's face hardened. Now listen here, young lady. No, you listen, I cut her off, feeling years of pent-up frustration pouring out. That offer expired the moment you decided to drag us through court. It's gone, Mom. Just like any respect or affection I had left for you. She paled, then flushed with anger. You ungrateful little. I'm not finished, I said, my voice cold. If you ever try to threaten me or slander our company again, I will sue you for every penny you have left. And trust me, I'll win. Without waiting for a response, I got into my car and drove away, watching her shrinking figure in my rearview mirror. It felt like the end of a chapter, but also the beginning of something new. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Rachel and I threw ourselves into work, expanding the company in ways Dad had only dreamed of. We launched a new eco-friendly paint line, opened 3 new factories, and even started a scholarship program for aspiring young entrepreneurs. Through it all, Dad's memory was our guiding light. We kept his photo on the wall of our main conference room, a constant reminder of where we came from and what we were working towards. Dad was gone, but his legacy lived on through us. Through the company he'd built from nothing, through the love he'd shared with Rachel, and through the strength he'd instilled in me. And as for me and Rachel? We were more than just business partners. We were family. Bound not by blood, but by love, respect, and a shared dream. I never knew how close I came to not existing. Mom told me years later that when she found out she was pregnant with me, she wasn't sure they could afford a kid. Dad wasn't making much, and they were barely scraping by. But then my dad's parents, my grandparents, found out about the pregnancy. Not only were they thrilled, but they went above and beyond. They gave Mom and Dad their house, a nice place in a good neighborhood, close to a great school. They even promised to help out with money. I was born into that house, and for the first few years, life was pretty good. Grandma and Grandpa were always around, picking me up, taking care of me when Mom was working. They'd take me to the park, read me stories, and sneak me treats when Mom wasn't looking. When I started school at 5, they'd pick me up every day. We'd go for ice cream or to the playground. Those were some of the happiest times of my life. But then, everything changed. I remember that night clearly. I was supposed to be asleep, but the yelling woke me up. Mom and Dad were having a huge fight. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I heard words like betrayal and how could you? Then I heard the front door slam. I peeked out my window and saw Dad stumbling to his car. He was holding a bottle. I later learned it was whiskey. I watched him drive off, tires screeching. That was the last time I saw my dad alive. The next morning, 2 police officers came to our door. Mom collapsed when they told her Dad had been in an accident. He'd lost control of the car and driven off the road. He didn't make it. The funeral was a blur. I remember holding Mom's hand, confused about why Dad was in a box and why everyone was crying. Grandma and Grandpa were there, hugging me tightly, their faces streaked with tears. But after the funeral, things changed rapidly. Mom seemed to bounce back quickly, too quickly. Within months, she had a new man in her life. Before I knew it, they were married, and Mom was pregnant again. You're going to have a little sister, Carol, Mom told me, her eyes shining. Isn't that exciting? I nodded, not sure how to feel. Everything was changing so fast, and I missed Dad. I missed Grandma and Grandpa too. They stopped coming around, and I didn't understand why. Mom, why don't Grandma and Grandpa visit anymore? I asked one day. Mom's face hardened. They don't want anything to do with us anymore, Carol. They abandoned us, because I've started a new family. Then her face softened. At least they left us the house and helped with the money for your education. That's something to be thankful for. My little sister arrived a few months after Mom remarried. I remember Mom saying she was born prematurely, but even at my young age, something felt off about that explanation. Still, I was too preoccupied with the sudden changes in my life to question it much. My new stepfather, Frank, worked as a driver. Mom kept her job as a salesperson. We weren't rich by any means, but we always had enough for the essentials. At least, that's what I was told. From the start, it was clear that Frank didn't like me much. He'd glare at me across the dinner table, his jaw clenching whenever I spoke. "Can't you keep that kid quiet?" he'd snap at Mom. "I'm trying to eat in peace here." Mom would rush to placate him. "Carol, honey, why don't you go to your room? I'll bring you your dinner later." As time went on, these moments became more frequent. Frank's temper was short, and everything seemed to set him off, especially me. He'd call me names when Mom wasn't around, his face twisted in disgust. "You're nothing but a freeloader," he'd spit. "A burden. You know that, right?" I'd nod silently, fighting back tears. What else could I do? The contrast between how Frank treated me and my sister was stark. With her, he was all smiles and affection. He'd bounce her on his knee, shower her with gifts, and speak to her in a sickeningly sweet voice that made my stomach turn. "There's my little angel," he'd coo. "Daddy's got a surprise for you." Mom, desperate to keep Frank happy, started finding ways to keep me out of sight. She'd usher me to my room whenever Frank came home, locking the door behind me. I'd sit there for hours, listening to the sounds of a happy family on the other side, laughter, conversation, the clink of cutlery on plates. I didn't understand why I had to eat alone in my room, why I couldn't move freely in my own home, why I was treated like an unwelcome guest. As I grew older, the isolation intensified. Family holidays? I wasn't invited. Trips to visit Frank's friends and relatives? I was left behind. Even when people came to our house, I was told to stay in my room and keep quiet. "We don't want to upset Frank," Mom would say, her eyes pleading. "You know how he gets." And I did know. I'd seen his rages, heard the crashes and bangs when something set him off. So I stayed quiet. I stayed out of the way. I became a ghost in my own home. The only times I felt any semblance of normalcy were the rare occasions when Mom would take me shopping or run errands with her. But even then, there was no room for fun or freedom. It was all business, quick and efficient, always with an eye on the clock. "We can't be too long," Mom would say, checking her watch nervously. "Frank will be home soon." As the years passed, I retreated further into myself. I became shy, withdrawn. At school, I barely spoke to anyone. But in the privacy of my room, in the worlds I created in my mind, I found an escape. I'd make up stories, grand adventures where I was the hero, where I was wanted and loved. When I turned 16, my life took an unexpected turn. Spending most of my time alone in my room, I'd become pretty good at using the internet to escape my reality. One day, I stumbled upon an online publishing house that was looking for fresh voices in children's and young adult literature. On a whim, I submitted some of my stories. To my shock, they loved them. Before I knew it, I was working with them regularly, writing stories and helping develop educational apps for kids and teens. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. My ideas were popular, my stories were being published, and best of all, I was earning my own money. I saved every penny I could, watching my bank account grow with a sense of excitement I'd never felt before. One day, feeling particularly bold after a big payment came through, I decided to share my success with Mom. We were alone in the kitchen, Frank was out on a long-haul drive, and my sister was at a friend's house. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking a little, "I've got something to tell you. I've been working for this publishing house, writing stories and stuff. And, well, I'm making pretty good money." Mom's eyes widened. "Really? Oh, Carol, that's wonderful. I always knew you were a smart girl." Her praise, so rare these days, made me glow. But then her expression changed, becoming calculating. "You know," she said, leaning in close, "this is perfect timing. We've been having some financial troubles lately." My heart sank. I should have known better than to hope for simple pride or happiness. "The thing is," Mom continued, "this house is so big, and the upkeep is expensive. And well, raising you hasn't been cheap either. We've been exhausted trying to provide for you all these years." I felt like I'd been slapped. Hadn't I been the one locked away, barely even part of the family? How had I been such a burden? "Remember that college fund we set aside for you?" Mom said, not meeting my eyes. "Well, we had to use that money. For the house, you know. But now that you're earning your own money, you can support yourself, right?" I nodded numbly, not trusting myself to speak. "That's my girl," Mom said, patting my hand. "Oh, and one more thing. Frank and I have been talking, and we think it's best if you move out after you graduate. We're planning to renovate your room for your sister. She needs more space, you understand." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Move out? But where will I go?" Mom shrugged, already turning away. "You're a smart girl, Carol. I'm sure you'll figure it out. You've got some savings now, right?" As she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone, the full weight of her words hit me. I was being kicked out. The money I thought would be my ticket to college was gone. And my own mother didn't seem to care where I ended up. The months leading up to graduation were a blur of anxiety and desperate planning. I threw myself into my schoolwork during the day, determined to at least finish high school strong. At night, I worked tirelessly on my writing projects, trying to save every penny I could. But no matter how I crunched the numbers, it wasn't enough. College tuition, living expenses, books, it all added up to way more than I had or could hope to earn in time. The realization that my dreams of higher education were slipping away hit me hard. I tried to talk to Mom about it once, hoping against hope that she'd have a change of heart. "Mom, I've been looking at college costs, and I don't think I can." She cut me off before I could finish. "Carol, we've been over this. You're on your own now. You'll figure it out." The day of graduation came and went. I should have felt proud, accomplished. Instead, I felt numb. The next morning, Mom appeared in my doorway with a couple of cardboard boxes. "Time to pack up, Carol," she said, her tone eerily cheerful. "Your sister's so excited about her new room." I packed my life into those boxes, fighting back tears. When I was done, Mom helped me carry them to the front door. As I stood on the porch, my meager possessions at my feet, Mom gave me a quick, awkward hug. "Good luck out there," she said, and then the door closed behind her. I stood there for a moment, shell-shocked. Then, taking a deep breath, I picked up my boxes and walked away from the only home I'd ever known. With what little money I had, I managed to rent a tiny studio apartment. It was in a sketchy part of town, and the sound of sirens often kept me up at night, but it was mine. I decided to postpone college for a year. I had no choice, really, and focus on work. I reached out to my contacts at the publishing house, practically begging for more work. To my relief, they were more than happy to oblige. "We've been impressed with your work, Carol," my editor told me. "How would you feel about writing some children's books for us?" I jumped at the opportunity. Soon, I was working around the clock, churning out stories and illustrations. The work was demanding, but I loved it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was good at something, like I had a purpose. Living alone wasn't easy, but I was used to fending for myself. I learned to budget, to cook simple meals, to navigate the public transit system. I even made a few friends in the building, other young people trying to make it on their own. But despite my best efforts, saving for college remained a distant dream. Every time I thought I was getting ahead, some new expense would crop up. A plumbing emergency in my apartment, a laptop repair, a trip to the doctor when I caught a nasty flu, each setback ate into my savings. It had been a year since I'd left home when my phone rang with a number I never expected to see again. My mother's voice came through, sickly sweet and unfamiliar. "Carol, sweetie, how are you? I've missed you so much. Why don't you come visit us this weekend?" Suspicion immediately flared in my gut, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to visit, packing an overnight bag with a mix of anticipation and dread. As soon as I arrived at my old home, my suspicions were confirmed. Mom was overly affectionate, hugging me tightly and peppering me with questions about my life. It felt artificial, like watching a bad actress perform. "Oh, Carol," she cooed, "you must be tired from your trip. Why don't you sleep in your sister's room tonight? She can take the guest room." I nodded, bemused. My sister, now a teenager, rolled her eyes but didn't argue. The next morning, I woke to the sound of familiar voices downstairs. Curious, I made my way to the kitchen, where I froze in the doorway. Sitting at the table were two elderly people I hadn't seen in years, but recognized instantly: my grandparents, my dad's parents. Grandma's eyes lit up when she saw me. "Carol, oh, look how you've grown." I stood there, shocked, as they explained why they were there. "We're moving to a nursing home soon," Grandpa said, his voice gruff with emotion. "But before we go, we wanted to make sure you're doing well. That you're prospering." "Yes," Grandma chimed in, "tell us all about your college. What are you studying, dear?" I opened my mouth, not sure what to say, when Mom jumped in. "Oh, Carol's doing wonderfully at school. Aren't you, honey? Top of her class, just like always." I stared at her, unable to believe the lies flowing so easily from her lips. My grandparents looked pleased, but they still had questions. "That's wonderful," Grandma said. "Could we talk to Carol alone for a bit? We'd love to catch up." A flash of panic crossed Mom's face. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary. Carol's quite busy, aren't you, dear? In fact, we should probably wrap this up soon." She quickly steered the conversation to other topics, barely letting me get a word in. As the visit came to an end, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. Grandma pressed something into my hand, a business card. As soon as my grandparents left, the change in Mom was immediate. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, indifferent expression I knew all too well. "Well, that's done," she said, clearing the table briskly. "You should probably head home now, Carol, I'm sure you have things to do." I stood there, the business card burning a hole in my pocket, as Mom all but pushed me out the door. The warmth and affection of moments ago were gone, replaced by the cool detachment I'd grown up with. As soon as I got back to my tiny apartment, I pulled out the business card my grandmother had slipped me. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" My grandmother's voice came through, warm and familiar, despite the years. "Grandma, it's Carol," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We talked for a while, her voice filled with a mixture of joy and concern. Before I knew it, we'd arranged for her and Grandpa to visit me the next day. I gave them my apartment address, feeling a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. As soon as I hung up, I threw myself into a cleaning frenzy. My small studio apartment wasn't much, but I was determined to make it as welcoming as possible. I scrubbed every surface, organized my meager belongings, and even managed to find a vase for some fresh flowers I picked up from the corner store. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I spent hours in the tiny kitchenette, preparing lunch for tomorrow. I even decided to bake Grandma's favorite cookies, snickerdoodles, using a recipe I'd found online. Morning came too quickly. I was just pulling the last batch of cookies from the oven when there was a knock at the door. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed down my shirt and went to answer it. There they stood, Grandma and Grandpa. For a moment, we all just stared at each other, years of separation hanging between us. Then Grandma stepped forward, enveloping me in a tight hug. "Oh, Carol," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Look at you, all grown up." As I ushered them inside, I saw their eyes widen as they took in my small apartment. Confusion flickered across their faces. "Carol," Grandpa said slowly, "why are you living here? Your mother told us you were living in the house." Before I could even begin to explain, they launched into a story that turned my world upside down. "We've always wanted to be part of your life," Grandma said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But your mother, she kept us away." They told me about the night my father died, the real story. My mother had been unfaithful. She was already pregnant with my sister when my father found out. He wanted a divorce, but then the accident happened. I sat there, stunned, as they continued. "The house I grew up in, the one Mom and Frank still lived in, was mine. Left to me in my father's will. We've been sending money for your care every month," Grandma said, reaching for my hand. "After you graduated, we increased the amount, thinking you were in college and needed more." The room seemed to spin. All this time, struggling to make ends meet, and there had been money meant for me? A house in my name? "We wanted to make sure you were living comfortably in the house, that everything was okay," Grandpa added. "That's why we came to visit yesterday." As I sat there, staring at my grandparents in disbelief, the weight of their words slowly sank in. I felt a surge of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness for the childhood I never had. "I don't understand," I stammered. "All this time, there was money for me? A house in my name?" Grandma squeezed my hand tightly. "Tell us everything, Carol. We need to know what really happened." And so, I did. I told them about my lonely childhood, confined to my room like a dirty secret. I spoke of Frank's hostility, of always feeling like a burden. I explained how the money for college had been taken away, how I'd been kicked out with nothing but a few boxes of belongings. "I've been working nonstop," I said, my voice cracking. "Writing children's books, living in this tiny apartment, trying to save for college. I never knew about any maintenance money." As I spoke, I watched my grandparents' expressions change from shock to fury. Grandpa's face turned red, his hands clenching into fists. "This is unacceptable," he growled. "What your mother has done, it's theft, it's abuse. We're going to make this right, Carol. I promise you that." True to their word, my grandparents sprang into action. They hired a lawyer, one of the best in the city. Over the next few weeks, I watched in awe as they fought tirelessly on my behalf. The court case was brutal. Mom and Frank tried to paint me as a rebellious, ungrateful child who had run away. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements showed years of diverted funds. Neighbors testified about my isolation. In the end, justice prevailed. The judge ruled in our favor, evicting Mom and Frank from the house that was rightfully mine. The back payments of maintenance money were ordered to be paid to me in full. As we left the courthouse, I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. Yes, I had won, but at what cost? The family I had known, dysfunctional as it was gone forever. But I had a new family now. Grandma and Grandpa were determined to make up for lost time. They helped me move into my house, a concept I was still struggling to grasp. They gave me money for tuition and sat with me for hours, helping me choose the right college. I decided on a school close to the nursing home where they were moving. It felt right, being near them after all these years apart. For a while, everything seemed perfect. I visited Grandma and Grandpa often, soaking up their love and wisdom. We'd play cards, watch old movies, and talk for hours. They told me stories about my dad, filling in the blanks of my own history. But life, I was learning, had a cruel way of giving with one hand and taking with the other. Just as I was settling into my new life, reveling in the love of my grandparents, tragedy struck. Grandpa went first. A heart attack, quick and unexpected. Grandma followed barely 2 months later. The doctor said it was natural causes, but I knew the truth, she'd lost her will to live without him. Once again, I found myself alone. The grief was overwhelming. I'd only just found them, only just started to heal the wounds of my past, and now they were gone. I threw myself into my studies, trying to distract myself from the pain. But every empty holiday, every milestone I couldn't share with them, was a fresh wound. Years passed, and life took on a rhythm I never thought possible. I graduated college with honors, landing a job at a prestigious publishing house, the same one that had given me my first break as a teenager. With the inheritance from my grandparents, I bought a cozy apartment close to work, a place that was truly mine. My financial situation had dramatically improved. I rented out my grandparents' house and my childhood home, providing a steady stream of additional income. For the first time in my life, I felt secure, stable, and most importantly, happy. I had friends, a fulfilling career, and a sense of peace I'd never known before. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One sunny afternoon, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it instantly, my mother's. With a mix of curiosity and dread, I answered. "Carol?" Her voice was sickly sweet, dripping with false affection. "Sweetie, how are you?" Before I could respond, she launched into a sob story. My sister was pregnant, abandoned by her husband. They were all living together, Mom, Frank, and my sister, crammed into a tiny rented apartment. "We have nowhere to go," Mom whimpered. "I was hoping, well, that house you own, your childhood home. Could we maybe stay there? Just until we get back on our feet." I listened in stunned silence as she alternated between begging and crying, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I remembered all too well from my childhood. "Please, Carol," she pleaded. "We're family. We need your help." As she spoke, memories flooded back. The lonely nights locked in my room. The years of neglect and emotional abuse. The day she kicked me out with nothing but a few boxes of belongings. "Family?" I finally spoke, my voice cold. "That's rich coming from you, Mom. Where was this family when you locked me away like a dirty secret? Where was it when you kicked me out with nowhere to go?" "Carol, that's all in the past." "No," I cut her off. "It's not in the past. It's right here, right now. You're only reaching out because you need something from me. Just like always." I could almost hear her scrambling, trying to find the right words to manipulate me. But I wasn't that scared, lonely girl anymore. "You want my advice, Mom? Solve your own problems. Figure it out on your own. Isn't that what you told me when you threw me out?" "But Carol..." "Good luck," I said, echoing her words from years ago. "You're going to need it." Without waiting for a response, I hung up. My hand shook as I blocked her number, but I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For years, I'd carried the burden of her rejection, her neglect. But now, I was finally free. My name's Amelia, and I was born with cerebral palsy. Now, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, growing up wasn't exactly a walk in the park. My parents? Well, let's just say they had a hard time wrapping their heads around having a kid like me. My brain works just fine, but my spine's got a mind of its own, and my left arm? It's a bit of a slacker. All this adds up to make me look a bit different from your average Joe, or Jane, in my case. I remember those early days, even though I was just a tiny thing. My mom, she couldn't even bring herself to hold me at first. It was like I was some kind of alien or something. Instead, I had this nanny taking care of me. She was nice enough, I guess, but it wasn't the same as having your mom there, you know? The nanny was my grandmother's idea. Grandma, now there's a woman who knew how to love. She didn't give a damn about how I looked or moved. To her, I was just her granddaughter, plain and simple. She was loaded, which came in handy more times than I can count. As I got older, things didn't exactly improve on the home front. Walking was a real pain in the ass, literally. I'd take a few steps, then bam. Faceplant on the floor. And my mom? She'd just stand there, watching me struggle. "You need to learn to get up on your own, Amelia," she'd say, not even trying to hide the disgust in her voice. But I wasn't stupid. I knew she just didn't want to touch me. It was like I had cooties or something. Things really took a turn when I hit the big 0 to 5. Mom got pregnant again, and 9 months later, out pops my little sister. Talk about a golden child. This kid was everything I wasn't: cute, bouncy, and most importantly to my mom, normal. From that day on, it was like I'd become invisible. Mom was all about her new baby girl. She'd spend hours taking selfies with her, posting them all over social media. "Look at my beautiful daughter," she'd write, and I'd think, what about me? Aren't I your daughter too? As I got older, things didn't exactly improve on the mobility front. Crutches became my constant companions, and on bad days, I'd roll around in a wheelchair. It wasn't ideal, but hey, you gotta work with what you've got, right? My mom would always come up with these excuses why I couldn't go out. "Oh, Amelia, it's not safe for you in other people's houses," she'd say. Or, "The shopping center isn't equipped for someone like you, sweetie." But I wasn't born yesterday. Even at that young age, I could see right through her bullshit. It wasn't about my safety or comfort, she was just embarrassed to be seen with me. God forbid her friends see her with her special daughter. So, my childhood became a never-ending cycle of 4 walls and a ceiling. While my sister got to experience the world, make friends, and create memories, I was stuck at home, watching life pass me by through the window. My parents didn't even try to hide the fact that they hated going anywhere with me. It was like I was some kind of burden they were forced to carry. When school time rolled around, you'd think things might change, right? Fat chance. Instead of sending me to a regular school where I might actually interact with kids my age, my parents insisted that Grandma foot the bill for a specialized school. "It's for the best, Amelia," Dad would say, not quite meeting my eyes. "You'll be with kids who understand you better." What he really meant was, "We don't want you embarrassing us at a normal school." But hey, who needs social skills and diverse experiences, am I right? So off I went, every day, driven by a nanny Grandma hired. Don't get me wrong, the nanny was nice enough, but it wasn't the same as having your mom or dad drop you off, you know? Now, Grandma, she was a whole different story. While my parents were busy pretending I didn't exist, Grandma was all about helping me thrive. "Amelia, my dear," she'd say, her eyes twinkling, "how about we take a little trip this weekend?" And just like that, I'd find myself on adventures I never thought possible. We'd visit museums, go to the park, even take short trips to nearby cities. For the first time in my life, I felt like a normal kid. Grandma didn't stop there, though. She was determined to give me every opportunity to improve. Massages, physical therapy, experimental treatments, you name it, she paid for it. "With the right care, there's nothing you can't do, Amelia," she'd tell me, her voice full of conviction. "You're going to have a wonderful life, full of friends and joy. You'll see." I remember this one time, after a particularly grueling therapy session, I was feeling pretty down on myself. Grandma noticed, of course, she always did. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, sitting down next to me. "Why bother with all this, Grandma?" I said, gesturing at my uncooperative body. "It's not like I'm ever going to be normal." She took my face in her hands, forcing me to look at her. "Amelia, listen to me. There's no such thing as normal. Everyone's got their own struggles, their own challenges. Yours are just a bit more visible, that's all. But that doesn't make you any less worthy of love, of friendship, of a full and happy life. You hear me? That was Grandma for you. Always ready with a hug, a word of encouragement, or a surprise treat. She believed in me when no one else did, not even myself. And slowly but surely, I started to believe too. It was Grandma's birthday, and she dropped a bombshell on us. She wanted to celebrate at a fancy restaurant. Now, for most families, this wouldn't be a big deal. But for us? It was like she'd suggested we all go skydiving. The next day, Mom came into my room with a forced smile. "Amelia, honey, Grandma's having a birthday dinner at a restaurant. But you're not feeling well, right? It's probably best if you stay home." I knew the drill. I was supposed to nod and agree, be the good, understanding daughter. But something in me snapped. Actually, Mom, I feel fine. I'd love to go to Grandma's dinner. The color drained from her face. Oh, but the restaurant might not be accessible. And you know how tired you get. It's really better if you stay home. Before I could argue, the doorbell rang. Mom's eyes widened in panic. That's Grandma. Quick, get in bed and pretend you're sick. But it was too late. Grandma bustled in, took one look at me sitting up in my wheelchair, and smiled knowingly. There's my girl. All ready for dinner, I see. Mom started sputtering some excuse about me being ill, but Grandma wasn't having it. She walked right up to me, put her hand on my head, and declared, "Doesn't feel like a fever to me. Come on, Amelia, let's get you to that restaurant." And just like that, we were all piling into Grandma's car, me in my wheelchair, my sister in her frilly new dress, and my parents looking like they were headed to a funeral instead of a birthday celebration. The restaurant was buzzing when we arrived. I saw relatives I hadn't seen in years, and to my surprise, they seemed genuinely happy to see me. As we settled in for dinner, I couldn't help but notice how Mom positioned herself as far from me as possible. She was chatting and laughing with everyone else, but it was like I didn't exist. I tried my best to eat neatly, I really did. But sometimes my hand just doesn't cooperate, you know? I saw Mom wince every time I dropped food or made a mess. Grandma, bless her heart, didn't miss a beat. She helped me when I needed it, chatted with me like I was the most interesting person at the table, and made sure I was comfortable. At one point, she called out Mom. "Susan, why aren't you helping Amelia with her meal?" Mom's face flushed red. She quickly scooped up my sister and plastered on a fake smile. "Oh, I can't manage both girls at once, Mom. You know how it is." I saw the flash of anger in Grandma's eyes, but before she could say anything, Dad stood up abruptly. "Well, this has been lovely, but I think it's time we headed home. Amelia looks tired." I wasn't tired. I was having the time of my life. But I knew better than to argue. As Dad wheeled me out, I caught sight of Grandma's face. She looked sad and disappointed, but she gave me a little wink. It was her way of saying, "Don't worry, I've got your back." As we drove home in silence, I couldn't help but think about the evening. Yeah, it had been awkward and uncomfortable at times. But for a few brief moments, I'd felt like part of a real family. And you know what? That feeling was worth all the awkwardness in the world. The feeling of awkwardness accompanied me all my childhood. Whenever we had visitors, you know, the normal people my parents actually wanted to associate with, I'd get the same old song and dance. "Amelia," Mom would say, her voice sickly sweet, "why don't you go to your room for a bit? We're having company." At first, it stung. But over time I got used to it. So, I'd will myself into my room, shut the door, and wait. I'd hear the laughter, the chatter, the sounds of a normal family having a normal time. And I'd sit there, alone, trying not to feel like a freak in my own home. But you know what? I'm nothing if not adaptable. I taught myself to cook, even though my hands shook and I dropped more than a few plates along the way. I learned to draw, pouring my feelings onto paper when I couldn't express them out loud. And I wrote. Boy, did I write. Poems mostly, little snippets of emotion that I could never quite say out loud. The funny thing is, for a while there, I thought I had an ally in all this. My little sister, when she was just a tiny thing, she used to love me. Like, really love me. She'd toddle into my room, all big eyes and chubby cheeks, and just want to be near me. I remember this one time, she must have been about 3. She came into my room while I was drawing. "Mia," she squealed, she couldn't quite manage Amelia yet. "Draw me." So I did. It wasn't great, mind you, a wobbly circle for a head, stick arms, and legs. But to her, it was a masterpiece. She hugged that paper like it was made of gold. But then Mom walked in. The look on her face when she saw her precious baby girl cuddled up next to me? You'd think she'd caught her playing in mud. Sarah, she snapped. Come here, get away from your sister. Sarah looked confused. But Mommy, Mia drawing me. Mom snatched the picture away. That's nice, honey, but let's go play in your room instead, okay? And just like that, it started. Every time Sarah tried to get close to me, Mom would pull her away. Like I was contagious or something. And over time? Well, Sarah learned. She stopped coming to my room, stopped asking me to play or draw for her. By the time she hit her teens, she was just like Mom. I'd hear her giggling with her friends in the living room, but I knew better than to go out there. One day, I wheeled myself out to get a glass of water, forgetting she had friends over. The look of horror on her face when she saw me? It was like looking at a mini version of Mom. Amelia, she hissed. Go back to your room. My friends are here. And just like that, I was back in my sanctuary, my prison, my room. But you know what? It didn't hurt as much as it used to. Because in that room, I wasn't Amelia the freak, Amelia the embarrassment. I was just Amelia. The girl who could cook a mean omelet, draw pictures that made people smile, even if those people were just me and Grandma, and write poems that captured all the things I couldn't say out loud. Meanwhile, life went on, and graduation came. Man, what a mix of emotions that was. There I was, surrounded by my classmates, other special kids like me. And you know what? For once, I felt normal. We were all different in our own ways, but here, in this moment, we were the same. Kids who'd made it despite the odds. I remember looking around at all the smiling faces, the proud parents, the teary-eyed teachers. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself feel proud too. I'd done it. Despite everything, I'd actually done it. But then reality came crashing back. My eyes scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces. Mom, Dad, Sarah? Nope, nope, and nope. They were probably sipping cocktails on some beach right about now, enjoying their much-needed family vacation. Funny how their idea of family never seemed to include me. But you know who was there? Grandma. Front and center, beaming like I'd just won the Nobel Prize or something. When they called my name, I swear her cheers were loud enough to shake the rafters. Fast forward a few months, and suddenly the house was buzzing with excitement. Mom and Dad's 20th wedding anniversary was coming up, and they'd decided to go all out. They were making a whole damn movie about their happy family life. I remember thinking, well, this should be interesting. For 2 weeks straight, it was like living in some bizarre reality show. We were dragged from location to location, the local entertainment center, some picturesque nature spot, even a yacht. Where'd they even get a yacht? We'd change clothes more times than I could count, pose for endless photos, record cheesy congratulations, and even sing songs. It was exhausting, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't also kind of fun. For once, I was included. Sure, Mom would fuss about how to position my wheelchair so it looked natural, and Dad would get this pinched look on his face whenever the photographer had to take extra time to get me in the shot. But I was there. I was part of it. I even wrote a special poem for Mom and Dad. Spent weeks on it, actually. Agonized over every word, practicing in front of my mirror until I could recite it without stumbling. When it came time to record it, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Mom, Dad, I started, my voice shaky but determined. 20 years of love and life, of joy and strife. Through all the ups and downs, you've stood strong, a testament to love's enduring song. I kept going, pouring my heart out in verse. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. I looked up, half expecting to see tears in their eyes or something. Instead, Mom was fussing with Sarah's hair, and Dad was checking his watch. That was nice, Amelia, Mom said, not quite meeting my eyes. Very creative. Now, let's get Sarah set up for her piano piece, shall we? And just like that, my moment was over. But you know what? I didn't let it get me down. Because for those 2 weeks, I'd been part of something. I'd contributed. And even if they couldn't appreciate it, I knew I'd done something special. The big day was approaching fast. The director had been working his magic, weaving together our new footage with clips from the family archives. I was buzzing with excitement, eager to see how it all came together. When the finished product arrived, I wheeled myself into the living room, ready for the grand unveiling. But Mom quickly intercepted me. "Oh, Amelia," she said, that fake sweetness coating her words like cheap syrup, "we're saving it for the party. You'll see it with everyone else. It'll be more special that way." Finally, the day of the anniversary party arrived. Grandma's place was decked out like something out of a movie itself. Her sprawling lawn had been transformed into an outdoor cinema, with plush pillows scattered across the grass for seating. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over everything, guests started to arrive. "All right, everyone," Dad called out, clinking his glass for attention. "If you'd all like to take a seat, we're about to start the show." There was a flurry of movement as people settled onto the pillows. I stayed in my wheelchair, parked next to Grandma. She gave my hand a squeeze as the movie began to play. The opening shot was of Mom and Dad on their wedding day. They looked so young, so happy. Mom's dress was beautiful, and Dad couldn't take his eyes off her. I felt a lump form in my throat. Then came a montage of their early years together. Vacations, parties, lazy Sundays at home. They looked so in love, so carefree. I searched each frame, waiting for my entrance. But as the timeline of their lives unfolded on the screen, a sinking feeling began to grow in my stomach. There were shots of them with friends, with colleagues, with other family members. But I was nowhere to be seen. Then came footage of Mom's pregnancy, and my heart leapt. This is it, I thought. This is where I come in. But no. The next shot was of Sarah as a newborn, Mom cradling her with a look of pure adoration. Dad hovering proudly nearby. The movie continued, showing Sarah growing up. Her first steps, first day of school, dance recitals, family vacations. It was like watching a parallel universe where I didn't exist. Then came the footage from our recent shoots. I held my breath, waiting to see myself on screen. There was our family, singing and dancing, looking like the picture-perfect unit. But I wasn't there. It was as if I'd been erased, cut out of every frame. As the reality of what I was seeing sank in, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't some mistake or oversight. This was deliberate. They'd erased me. My own family had wiped me from their history. Grandma took one look at my face, and something in her snapped. She marched over to the projector and shut it off. The lawn was plunged into an awkward silence. "Susan, David," Grandma's voice, cut through the night air like a knife. "What the hell is this?" The guests started murmuring uncomfortably. Dad stepped forward, trying to calm things down. "Now, Mom, let's not make a scene." But Grandma was just getting started. "Make a scene? You want to talk about making a scene? How about erasing your child from your family history? That's one hell of a scene if you ask me." Mom's face had gone pale. "It's not like that," she stammered. "The photographer said Amelia wasn't photogenic. We were just trying to put our best foot forward." Grandma let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, that's rich, Susan. Shall we talk about how you wanted to abandon her the day she was born? How I had to promise financial support just to get you to keep your own child?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. I felt like I was going to be sick. "I've supported this family for years," Grandma continued. "Paid for your vacations, your luxuries. All I asked was that you love your daughter. And you couldn't even do that." Suddenly, Sarah jumped up. "Shut up," she screamed. "Just shut up. Amelia's a cripple. She's embarrassing. I didn't want her in the video either." The silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister. Grandma turned to my parents, her voice cold. "Well done. You've raised one daughter to be just as intolerant as you are." Then she dropped the bombshell. "You know what? I'm done. Amelia is now my sole heir. Every penny I have will go to her." Mom exploded. "Are you insane? What does she need money for? She needs a full-time nurse, not a fortune." "Get out," Grandma said quietly. When they didn't move, she repeated it louder. "Get out of my house. Get out of my life. I'm done supporting your comfortable little existence." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mom laughed nervously. "Come on, Mom. You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," Grandma cut her off. "Leave. Now. And don't come back." It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. My parents and Sarah, looking shell-shocked, gathered their things and left. Grandma slammed the door behind them with a finality that echoed across the lawn. As the dust settled, I became aware of movement around me. The guests, who had witnessed this whole ugly scene, were approaching me one by one. Aunt Karen hugged me tightly. Uncle Jim patted my shoulder awkwardly but sincerely. Even some of my parents' friends, people who had never so much as looked at me before, came up to express their support. So, there I was, suddenly living in Grandma's big house. Talk about a plot twist, right? It was like stepping into a whole new world, one where I wasn't a dirty little secret to be hidden away, but a person worthy of love and respect. About a week after the great family meltdown, that's what I started calling it in my head, Grandma sat me down for a chat. "All right, Amelia," she said, that familiar twinkle in her eye. "Let's talk about your future. What do you want to do with your life?" I blinked at her, caught off guard. No one had ever really asked me that before. It was always assumed I'd just exist, I guess. Be taken care of. But never have dreams of my own. "I don't know," I stammered. "I never thought." "Well, start thinking," Grandma said, not unkindly. "The world's your oyster now, kiddo. What do you love doing?" And just like that, it hit me. "I love writing," I said, my voice growing stronger. "And drawing. I want to create things, Grandma. Beautiful things." Grandma's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Well, why didn't you say so? We'll get you into the best damn art and literature program we can find." Before I knew it, I was enrolled in the literature department of a nearby college. Grandma had made sure the campus was fully accessible, and even hired a part-time assistant to help me with any physical tasks I couldn't manage. That first day of college, I was terrified. I kept waiting for the stares, the whispers, the pitying looks I'd grown so accustomed to. But they never came. Sure, people noticed my wheelchair, but it was with curiosity rather than judgment. And once they got to know me, the real me, not the shadow I'd been for so long, the wheelchair became just another part of who I was, not my defining feature. I threw myself into my studies with a passion I never knew I had. Literature opened up whole new worlds to me, and my professors encouraged me to explore my own voice through poetry. My art classes taught me new techniques, ways to express on paper the thoughts and feelings I'd kept bottled up for so long. And you know what? Turns out, I wasn't half bad at this stuff. My poems started winning competitions, my artwork was featured in student exhibitions. For the first time in my life, I was being seen for my abilities, not my disabilities. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. There were days when the pain, both physical and emotional, felt overwhelming. Days when I missed my parents and sister, despite everything. But I had Grandma, and I had my art, and slowly but surely, I was building a life for myself. Now, here I am, holding my very first published book of poetry in my hands. It's a slim volume, nothing fancy, but it's mine. Every word, every illustration, they all came from me. From my experiences, my pain, my joy, my growth. As I flip through the pages, I can't help but smile at the dedication. To Grandma, who taught me that being different isn't a flaw, it's a feature. And to everyone who's ever felt invisible, May you find the strength to make yourself seen. I was always the other daughter. The one who didn't need constant attention. While my younger sister Sarah battled asthma, I battled invisibility in our own home. Every morning started the same way, Mom rushing to Sarah's room to check her breathing, while I got myself ready for school. "Sarah, honey, how are you feeling today?" "Let me check your temperature," Mom would say, her voice dripping with concern. "Don't forget your inhaler." "Do you want me to call Dr. Thompson?" I remember standing in the doorway, already dressed and ready for school, watching this daily ritual. My lunch was always whatever I could throw together myself, usually just a sandwich and an apple. Sarah got specially prepared meals, with all her favorite foods. Dad wasn't much different. He worked extra hours to pay for Sarah's medical bills, and when he was home, his attention went straight to her. "How's my little fighter doing?" he'd ask, completely passing by me on his way to Sarah's room. The pattern continued year after year. While Sarah went from specialist to specialist, I learned to take care of myself. I did my homework without help, packed my own bags for school trips, and figured out how to deal with teenage problems on my own. Mom never worked, she was too busy being Sarah's personal nurse and advocate. By my senior year of high school, I had perfect grades and a clear plan. I applied for scholarships behind my parents' backs. They were too busy taking Sarah to yet another specialist to help with college applications anyway. The day I got my full scholarship letter, I ran home excited to share the news. I found Mom in the kitchen, preparing Sarah's special allergen-free dinner. "Mom, I got a full scholarship to State University. You and Dad won't have to pay anything." "That's nice, dear. Could you set the table? Sarah needs to eat on schedule with her new medications." That moment crystallized everything for me. I realized I would never be the priority in this house, no matter what I achieved. But instead of letting it crush me, I let it fuel me. I didn't need their attention or approval. I had something better, I had my freedom. The day I left for college, Mom was too busy with Sarah's latest health crisis to even say goodbye properly. Dad just handed me some gas money and said, "Drive safe." College flew by like a dream. I threw myself into my studies, made real friends for the first time, and graduated with honors. The marketing department at Reynolds and Company snapped me up right after graduation, and suddenly I was earning more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I hadn't heard much from my parents during college, just the occasional text from Mom asking if I was doing okay before immediately launching into updates about Sarah's latest health issues. But that changed once I started working. The first call came about 6 months into my job. "Erica, honey," Mom's voice was sugary sweet, a tone I hadn't heard directed at me before. "Your father and I are in a bit of a tight spot. Sarah needs some new treatments, and with the medical bills." I cut her off. "How much do you need, Mom?" "Oh, just $2,000. We'll pay you back next month." They never did pay me back. Not for that loan, or the next one, or the one after that. But honestly, I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had something they needed, and that gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. Then I met Mike. He always making me laugh, always seeing the bright side. We dated for a year before he proposed, right there in that same break room with a ring hidden in a coffee cup. When we told my parents we were getting married, Mom's first response was, "Oh, but Sarah's having some health issues right now. We might not be able to contribute much." "We don't need anything," I told her firmly. "We're handling it ourselves." And we did. We had a small, perfect wedding with just our closest friends. Mike and I paid for everything ourselves, took a modest honeymoon to the beach, and came back ready to build our life together. We both worked hard and saved every penny we could. Within 2 years, we had enough for a down payment on a small apartment. 3 years later, it was paid off completely. "We should have a baby," Mike said one night, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset. I looked at him, this wonderful man who had given me everything I'd never had growing up, unconditional love, support, and a true partnership. Yes, I said. We should. Emily was born on a spring morning, perfect and healthy. Mike was the proudest dad I'd ever seen, taking pictures of every little thing she did. When she was 2 months old, he got a big promotion at work. Just one business trip, he told me, kissing Emily's forehead. 3 days in Chicago, then I'm all yours again. I drove him to the train station that morning. That was the last time I saw him. The call I got wasn't from Mike, it was from the railway company. There had been an accident. The train had derailed. There were no survivors. The first few weeks after Mike's death passed in a blur. I moved through my days like a ghost, going through the motions of feeding Emily, changing her, trying to keep both of us alive while feeling half dead inside. The insurance company called with details about Mike's life insurance policy, but money wasn't what I needed most right then. I needed help. Mom, I said over the phone, my voice cracking. I can't do this alone. Could you help me with Emily? Just for a few months while I get back on my feet. I'll pay you, whatever you want. There was a long pause on the other end. Oh, honey, Mom said, and for a moment I felt hope. Then, I'm not as young as I used to be. Taking care of a baby is so demanding, and with my blood pressure. I just can't risk my health, Erica. Maybe you could hire someone? You have the insurance money now, right? The words hit me like a slap. I thought about all those years Mom had devoted to Sarah's care, how she'd never worked, because Sarah needed her constant attention. But now, when her other daughter needed her, when her granddaughter needed her. Yeah, I said flatly. I'll figure something out. And I did. I found a wonderful nanny named Maria who loved Emily like her own. The insurance money meant I could afford the best care for my daughter, and slowly, we settled into a new normal. Emily grew from a baby into a toddler, showing more of Mike's smile every day. Then came the call about Sarah's engagement. Your sister is marrying James Peterson, Mom gushed over the phone. His family owns that big real estate development company. Can you believe it? That's great, I said, watching Emily stack blocks on our living room floor. I'm happy for her. But the next call wasn't so joyful. Dad sounded stressed. Erica, we need to talk about Sarah's wedding. We're taking out a loan. Using the house as collateral. When he told me the amount, I felt sick. Dad, no, that's your house. Your retirement security. You can't risk that for one day. Now listen here, he said, his voice getting that stern tone I remembered from childhood. We won't have the Petersons thinking we can't give Sarah a proper wedding. We've already signed the papers. I tried reasoning with them. I offered to help pay for a more modest celebration. But Mom just got offended. You don't understand, Erica. This is Sarah's big day. She deserves her dream wedding. We can't have her future in-laws thinking we're common. I thought about my own wedding, small, modest, perfect. Mike and I had paid for everything ourselves, proud to start our life together without debt. But of course, Sarah needed something grander. Sarah always needed more. Sarah's wedding was exactly what you'd expect, extravagant, over the top, and, according to Mom, absolutely perfect. Then Sarah moved away with James to Boston, and suddenly my parents' perfect daughter wasn't so perfect anymore. Can you believe she won't even take our calls? Mom sobbed into the phone one evening. We took out that loan for her wedding, and now she won't even help with the payments. I bit back an "I told you so" and instead said, that must be hard, Mom. Gradually, my parents started calling more often, not just when they needed money. They wanted to see Emily, invited us for Sunday dinners, remembered my birthday for the first time in years. It felt nice. Like maybe we could be a real family. I started helping them out, paying bills here and there, buying groceries. For Dad and Mom's 35th wedding anniversary, I surprised them with a 2-week vacation to Florida and a new car for Dad. You're such a good daughter, Erica, Mom said, actually hugging me. It was the first time I could remember her doing that in years. Then Dad got sick. Really sick. Something with his heart that kept him out of work for months. One evening, they asked me to come over after Emily's bedtime. "We're going to lose the house," Dad said, his voice weak. "The loan payments, without my salary." Mom was crying. "We don't know what to do, Erica. We're behind on payments already." "Move in with us," Mom suggested suddenly. "We could help with Emily after school, and you could help with the loan payments. Please, sweetheart. We don't want to lose our home." I thought about my apartment, my independence, the life I'd built for myself and Emily. "I don't know, Mom. It's an hour commute to work from here." "Please," Dad said, and I saw real fear in his eyes. "We'll make it work. Emily would love having her grandparents around." They were right about that part. When I told Emily we might move in with Grandma and Grandpa, her whole face lit up. Within a month, we were moved in. I found good tenants for my apartment, a young couple with steady jobs who signed a year-long lease. Emily was overjoyed, running around the house exploring every corner like it was a magical castle. I took over the loan payments and most of the household expenses. Mom seemed to transform overnight into the grandmother she'd never been before, picking Emily up from school, helping her with homework, making her favorite snacks. "Look what Grandma made for you, Emily," she'd say, pulling fresh cookies from the oven. Emily would beam, and I'd try not to remember all the times I'd come home to an empty kitchen as a child. For a while, it seemed to work. Dad's health improved, though slowly. I adjusted to the long commute, telling myself it was worth it to see Emily so happy. Every month when I made the loan payment, I reminded myself that I was helping my parents keep their home. But there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a voice that whispered, "How long can this last? When will the other shoe drop?" After Dad recovered and returned to work, I noticed Mom started making excuses about watching Emily. "My back hurts today, Erica. I'm not as young as I used to be. It's so exhausting keeping up with a child her age." Finally, one morning, she just came out with it, "I think you should hire a nanny. I can't handle this anymore." So I hired Karen, a sweet older lady who clicked with Emily immediately. Every morning, I'd leave for my hour-long commute to work, wondering why I was still living in my parents' house when I had a perfectly good apartment across town. But every time I mentioned moving back, Mom would bake her famous apple pie, the one she knew Emily loved, and say things like, "Oh, but we love having you both here. Don't we live so well together?" Emily would beam, her face covered in apple filling, and I'd push down my frustration for another month. This went on for 2 years. Then one evening, Mom and Dad sat me down after Emily went to bed. "Honey," Mom started, her eyes already welling up. "We still have 2 years left on Sarah's wedding loan." Dad jumped in, "We know it's a lot to ask, but could you stay until it's paid off? We're so close to being free of it." I thought about the exhausting commute, the way my life had been put on hold. But then I thought about Emily's happy face when she talked about living with her grandparents. "Okay," I said. "1 more year." I called my tenants and extended their lease. Then came the day that changed everything. I walked up to the house after another long day at work, and there was Sarah, standing in the doorway with a very pregnant belly. "Move away from the door, Sarah," Mom screeched from inside. "You'll catch your death in that draft." Sarah smirked at me as she stepped aside. Well, look who's here." Inside, it was like stepping back in time. Mom was fluttering around Sarah like a worried hen, adjusting pillows, checking her temperature, asking if she needed anything. "I made your favorite dinner, Sarah. And there's herbal tea for the baby." During dinner, Sarah dropped her bombshell. "I've decided to have the baby here," she announced. "So you and Dad can help with the newborn." Mom's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Of course we will. We'll help with everything." I sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, as the memory hit me like a physical blow. Me, alone with 3-month-old Emily, desperately calling Mom after Mike's death. "You know I can't risk my health taking care of a baby, Erica." I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw with perfect clarity what I'd been trying to ignore for years. Nothing had changed. Nothing would ever change. Sarah would always be the one who needed them, and I would always be the one who needed to understand. For the next 2 weeks, I watched history repeat itself in excruciating detail. Mom waited on Sarah hand and foot, bringing her breakfast in bed, scheduling doctor's appointments, and stocking the house with her favorite foods. The monthly apple pie that had been Mom's way of keeping Emily and me there? It stopped appearing altogether. The final straw came one evening when I overheard Mom and Sarah discussing nursery plans for my room and Emily's room. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked into the living room where everyone was gathered. "So that's it? You're just going to pretend the last few years never happened? That Sarah didn't abandon you with a massive loan that I've been helping pay?" Sarah rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. Saint Erica to the rescue." "Sarah, honey, don't get upset. It's not good for the baby," Mom fussed. "No, let's talk about this," I pressed on. "Let's talk about how you mortgaged your house for her wedding, and then she disappeared. Let's talk about how I've been paying that loan while she was off living her best life." "That's none of your business," Sarah snapped. "Nobody asked you to pay anything. If you're so unhappy here, why don't you just go back to your precious apartment?" "Erica," Mom cut in, practically pushing me toward the door. "Why don't you run to the store? We need a few things." She thrust a shopping list into my hands. "It'll give everyone a chance to calm down." I felt like a child being sent to my room, but I went. Maybe the fresh air would help me think clearly. 20 minutes later, I returned with the groceries. The sight that greeted me stopped me cold. Emily was sitting on the front steps, crying, surrounded by hastily packed bags and boxes, all our belongings. "Mommy!" She ran to me, sobbing. Aunt Sarah yelled at me. She said we had to get out, and when I started crying, she scared me and pushed all our stuff out here. Something snapped inside me. I stormed into the house. "How dare you!" I shouted. "How dare you treat my daughter like this?" "Erica, calm down," Dad started. "No, I will not calm down. For years, I've watched you favor Sarah. When Mike died, and I needed help with Emily, you couldn't be bothered. But Sarah snaps her fingers and you jump. I paid your bills, your loan, helped save your house, and this is how you repay me? By throwing my child out?" "Now listen here," Mom began. "No, you listen. I've spent my entire life being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who's supposed to understand when Sarah needs something. I've given you everything, and you've given me nothing but scraps of attention when Sarah wasn't around to demand it all." I grabbed the grocery bags and hurled them across the room. Cans rolled across the floor, eggs cracked, and vegetables scattered everywhere. Mom gasped. Sarah smirked. Dad's face turned red with anger. "Get out," he roared. "Get out of our house, and don't you dare come back." "You're no daughter of ours," Mom added, her voice cold. "We never want to see you again." I stood there, breathing hard, looking at these people who were supposed to be my family. Then I turned and walked out, closing the door on 28 years of trying to be good enough. Standing on the sidewalk that night, surrounded by hastily packed bags and boxes, I felt completely lost. Emily's small hand gripped mine tightly as tears rolled down her cheeks. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands, trying to think clearly. Our apartment was rented out for another year, and I couldn't just kick the tenants out. Legally, I needed to give them 3 months' notice. I called a nearby hotel first, then ordered an Uber XL to help with our bags. As Emily fell asleep in the hotel bed that night, I sat in the darkness with my laptop, searching for temporary apartments. The next morning, I found a furnished month-to-month rental about 15 minutes from my office. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. I called my tenants while Emily was eating breakfast. "Hi, Lisa," I said to my tenant. "I hate to do this, but I need to give you notice. Some family circumstances have changed. Lisa was understanding. Of course. We'll start looking right away. Take care, Erica. The next 3 months were strange. Our temporary apartment felt like living in limbo, not quite homeless, but not quite home either. Emily was quieter than usual, processing everything in her own way. Finally, after what felt like forever, Lisa called to say they'd found a new place. 3 months to the day after being thrown out of my parents' house, Emily and I walked back into our apartment. The moment I turned the key in the lock, something shifted inside me. This was our home. Our safe place. No drama, no favoritism, no walking on eggshells. We're home. Emily ran from room to room, rediscovering her old toys and books we'd left behind. That night, after Emily was asleep, I sat down and really looked at our finances. We were doing well, better than well, actually. Without supporting my parents, I had extra money each month. I opened a new savings account specifically for Emily's college fund and set up automatic monthly transfers. Over the next few weeks, we settled back into our old routine. Emily went back to her old school, where her friends welcomed her back with open arms. I threw myself into work, earning a promotion I'd been too distracted to pursue while living with my parents. 6 peaceful months passed. Emily and I had found our rhythm again: school, work, movie nights, weekend adventures. No drama, no guilt, no complicated family dynamics. Just us. Then came the knock at our door one Sunday morning. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the peephole. My heart stopped. There stood my parents, and they were holding a baby. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "Erica, please," Mom started crying immediately. "We need your help." Dad looked older than I remembered, more broken. "Sarah, she's gone." They told me the whole story as they stood in my doorway. I hadn't invited them in. Sarah's husband had discovered she was cheating. A DNA test proved the baby wasn't his. He divorced her and refused any responsibility for the child. And Sarah? She dropped the baby with our parents and disappeared. "We don't know where she is," Mom sobbed. "She won't answer our calls. We can't do this alone, Erica. We need you to move back in. Help with the loan payments, help with the baby." "I'm too old to care for an infant," Mom added, making that familiar tired face I'd seen so many times before. "Please, sweetheart. We'll lose the house." I looked at them, really looked at them. Mom's manipulative tears. Dad's desperate eyes. The innocent baby in their arms. And suddenly, I saw everything with perfect clarity. "No," I said quietly. "What?" Mom's tears stopped abruptly. I said, "No, I won't help you. Not this time." "How can you be so heartless?" Mom's voice rose, echoing through the hallway. "Your own family. We'll be out on the street. They'll take our house. All because you're too selfish to help." Several neighbors' doors opened, curious faces peeking out. "You want to do this here, Mom? Fine." My voice was steady. "Let's talk about how you refused to help me when Mike died and I had a 3-month-old. Let's talk about how you mortgaged your house for Sarah's wedding. Let's talk about how Sarah abandoned you with that loan, just like she's abandoned her baby now. This isn't about me being heartless, this is about you finally facing the consequences of your choices." "How dare you," Dad started. "No, how dare you? You created this situation with your constant favoritism. You taught Sarah she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. And now you want me to clean up your mess again? Not happening. We're your parents," Mom wailed. "No," I said firmly. "You're Sarah's parents. You made that very clear the night you threw my daughter out on the street. Now please leave, and don't come back. Forget my address, forget my phone number, forget I exist, just like you did for most of my life." I closed the door on their protests and leaned against it, breathing hard. Through the door, I could hear Mom's continued screaming, but it didn't touch me anymore. Mommy? Emily stood in the hallway, watching me. Are you okay? I walked over and hugged her tight. Yes, baby. I'm better than okay. I'm free. That was the last time I saw my parents. I don't know what happened to them or Sarah or the baby. Sometimes Emily asks about them, and I'm honest with her. I tell her that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from people who hurt you, even if they're family. These days, our life is good. Emily is thriving in school, I love my job, and we're building the kind of life I always dreamed of, one based on real love, not obligation or manipulation. Sometimes, late at night, I look at old family photos and feel a twinge of sadness for what could have been. But then I look at Emily, growing up strong and secure in the knowledge that she is loved unconditionally, and I know I made the right choice.
My name's Michelle, and it all started when I was just a kid, 8 years old. My parents split up, and suddenly, I was living with my grandparents. Dad moved to another state, called a few times, then poof, vanished completely after a couple of years. Mom married some loaded businessman and jetted off to Europe. I remember the day Mom left. She hugged me tight, tears in her eyes. "I'll visit, baby. I promise," she said. I believed her. Kids are stupid like that sometimes. For a while, she kept her word. She'd sweep in once a year, always on my birthday. No husband, no new baby. Yeah, I forgot to mention, Mom had another kid. A sister I'd never met. But Mom would show up, arms loaded with gifts, smelling of expensive perfume and full of stories about her fabulous new life. Life went on. I went to school, made some friends, tried to be normal. But there was always this hole, you know? This empty space where my parents should have been. Grandpa and Grandma did their best to fill it. Grandpa would take me fishing on weekends, teach me how to bait a hook and cast a line. Grandma was always in the kitchen, cooking up a storm. She'd let me help, teaching me her secret recipes. But when I turned 13, Grandpa got sick. Cancer, the doctors said. It was quick, brutal. One minute he was there, telling his corny jokes and showing me how to fix a leaky faucet. The next, he was gone. The funeral was small. Just me, Grandma, and a handful of neighbors. Mom couldn't make it. Business emergency, she said over the phone. I wanted to scream at her, tell her that her own father was dead, for crying out loud. But I didn't. I just said, "Okay, Mom, I understand." When I turned 16, Mom's yearly visits suddenly stopped. No explanation, no apology, just radio silence. Our relationship dwindled down to occasional phone calls, usually initiated by me. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my studies. Graduated high school with decent grades, nothing spectacular but enough to get me into a local college. Those years flew by in a blur of classes, part-time jobs, and hanging out with friends. Before I knew it, I was tossing my cap in the air at graduation. After college, I landed a job at a local marketing firm. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of purpose. Life was okay. Not great, not terrible, just okay. I had my routine, my friends, my cozy little world in Grandma's house. But life, that sneaky bastard, had other plans. It started with Grandma forgetting things. Small stuff at first, where she put her glasses, what day it was. I brushed it off as old age. But then it got worse. She'd forget to turn off the stove, wander out of the house in her nightgown. The diagnosis came like a punch to the gut, Alzheimer's. I tried my best to take care of her, but it was hard. Watching the woman who raised me, who was my rock, slowly slip away, it was hell. The day she died, I was holding her hand. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. "Michelle," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I love you, sweetheart." And then she was gone. I called Mom, choking back tears. "Mom, Grandma's, she's gone." There was a long pause on the other end. "Oh, Michelle," she finally said, her voice oddly flat. "I'm so sorry." I can't get away right now. Work is just crazy. You understand, don't you? So I planned the funeral alone. Picked out the casket, arranged the flowers, wrote the eulogy. The service was small, just like Grandpa's. As I watched them lower the casket, I felt more alone than ever. After the funeral, I went back to Grandma's house, my house now, I guess. It felt too big, too empty. But I couldn't bear the thought of leaving. This was my home, filled with memories of the two people who'd raised me. Life went on. I threw myself into work, trying to fill the void Grandma left behind. Months passed, then a year, then two. Then, out of the blue, Mom called. "Michelle, darling," she chirped, sounding oddly cheerful. "I have wonderful news. Your sister's coming to America for college. Isn't that exciting?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah, I guess. That's nice. Here's the thing," Mom continued, her voice taking on that syrupy sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "She wants to go alone, but I'm worried about her. I was hoping she could stay with you." I felt my stomach drop. "Mom, I don't think." "Now, Michelle," she cut me off, her voice suddenly sharp. "Let's not forget who that house really belongs to. I'm the direct heir, you know. I've been very generous letting you live there. The least you could do is look after your sister." I felt like I'd been slapped. "But Grandma left the house to me," I said weakly. "She wrote a will." Mom laughed, a cold sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, sweetie. You don't understand how these things work. Trust me, I could claim that house if I wanted to. But I'm not going to, as long as you help out with your sister. Understand?" My mind was reeling. Could she really take the house? I didn't know enough about inheritance law to be sure. And the thought of losing my home, the last connection I had to Grandma and Grandpa. The day my sister arrived felt like the beginning of the end. I stood at the airport, holding a sign with her name, Chloe, feeling like an idiot. I'd only seen her in Mom's Facebook photos, always dolled up and posing like a model. I figured I'd spot her easily. Boy, was I wrong. I almost missed her when she strutted out of the arrival gate. This girl looked nothing like the sister I'd seen in pictures. She was, well, perfect. Too perfect. Like someone had ordered her from a celebrity lookalike catalog. "Chloe?" I called out, uncertain. She turned, her oversized sunglasses perched on a nose that was definitely not the one I'd seen in older photos. "Oh my God, you must be Michelle," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. As she got closer, I could see the work she'd had done. Lips pumped up like life rafts, cheekbones that could cut glass, and a body that screamed at plastic surgeon's magnum opus. I felt like a potato next to her. As we waited for a porter, because apparently, that was a thing now, Chloe started rattling off demands like she was reading from a 5-year-old's Christmas list. "So, like, in Europe, we have this amazing housekeeper who does everything. And a cook. You've arranged for that, right?" She didn't wait for an answer. "And I'll need my own car. Nothing cheap, obviously. Maybe a Mercedes." I stood there, mouth hanging open. Was this girl for real? "Chloe," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I work a regular job. I can't afford." She cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. "Ugh. Whatever. Mom will take care of it. Let's just go already." We made it to the parking lot, and I led her to my car, a beat-up old Honda that had seen better days. Chloe took one look at it and lost her mind. What kind of squalor is this? Each word was like a slap. "You expect me to ride in that thing?" Before I could respond, she whipped out her phone. "Mom?" "Yeah, it's me. You will not believe what Michelle is trying to make me ride in. It's practically a death trap." Huh? Yeah, okay, love you too." She hung up and turned to me, a smug smile on her face. "Mom's arranging for a car service. You can take that rust bucket home yourself." An hour later, Chloe's fancy town car pulled up in front of Grandma's house. As soon as we stepped inside, Chloe's dramatics reached new heights.
Ugh.
It smells like old people and mothballs in here, she shrieked. This is, like, a health hazard or something. We need to throw everything out and start over. I watched in horror as she stomped through the house, criticizing everything from the worn carpet to the family photos on the walls. When she reached my bedroom, she tossed her designer bag on the bed. This room's mine now. You can sleep. I don't know, wherever. The couch maybe? I stood there, speechless. This was my room. My sanctuary. The place where I'd cried myself to sleep after Grandma died, where I'd celebrated getting my first job, where I kept all my memories. But looking at Chloe's face, I knew arguing would be pointless. This girl was used to getting her way, and she'd make my life hell if I refused. A week after Hurricane Chloe made landfall in my life, I came home from work to find a shiny new Mercedes parked in my spot in the garage. My beat-up Honda had been unceremoniously shoved onto the street. What the hell? I muttered, stepping into the house. Chloe was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up. Oh, that's my new car. Mom got it for me. Your piece of junk was taking up valuable space. The next day, I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. I came home from work, exhausted and looking forward to a quiet evening. Instead, I walked into chaos. The house was filled with strange men in overalls, carrying out furniture and bringing in new pieces I'd never seen before. I found Chloe in the backyard, sipping a cocktail and supervising the mayhem like a pint-sized dictator. Oh, you're home, she said, not bothering to look at me. Don't worry, I've got everything under control. This dump needed a major overhaul. I told Mom it was unlivable, and she agreed. You should be thanking me. I watched in horror as workers carried out Grandma's old rocking chair, the bookshelf Grandpa had built by hand, the coffee table where I'd done my homework for years. Stop, I cried. You can't throw those out. But it was too late. I could only watch helplessly as my memories were tossed into a dumpster. That night, I called Mom, tears streaming down my face. How could you let her do this? I sobbed. This is my home. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mom spoke, her voice was cold. Let's get one thing straight. That house belongs to me. I'm the rightful heir, and I'm letting you live there out of the goodness of my heart. If you can't appreciate that, maybe we need to reconsider this arrangement. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You wouldn't. Just be grateful and keep quiet, Mom snapped. And for God's sake, try to be nicer to your sister. She's doing you a favor. The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling like my whole world was crumbling around me. The renovation lasted 2 hellish weeks. I came home every day to find more of my life erased, replaced by Chloe's idea of fashion. The warm, cozy home I'd grown up in was transformed into something out of a sterile design magazine. When it was finally over, I stood in the living room, feeling like a stranger in my own house. The familiar floral wallpaper was gone, replaced by stark white paint. Grandma's comfy old sofa had been swapped for a sleek leather monstrosity that looked about as comfortable as sitting on a rock. The family photos that used to line the walls were nowhere to be seen. As I retreated to my new room, the smallest bedroom, since Chloe had claimed the master for herself, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing more than just furniture. I was losing my connection to Grandma and Grandpa, to the life I'd built here. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Chloe decided to turn our house into party central. It started small, just a few friends over on a Friday night. But soon, it was like living in a nightclub that never closed. Every weekend, sometimes even on weeknights, the house would fill up with Chloe's college buddies. They were all cut from the same cloth as her, rich, entitled, and looking down their noses at everything and everyone they deemed beneath them. Which, apparently, included me. One night, I overheard Chloe talking to one of her friends in the kitchen. I wasn't eavesdropping, I swear. I was just trying to grab a quick snack before retreating to my room to escape the chaos. "Who's that?" I heard a girl ask. "She looks kinda old to be here." Chloe's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, that's just Michelle. She's like this distant cousin or something. Mom lets her work here as a maid." I slammed the fridge shut, not caring if they heard me. Tears stung my eyes as I stormed back to my room. How dare she? This was my house, damn it. The next morning, after Chloe had finally rolled out of bed around noon, I confronted her. "No more parties," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This has to stop. I'm tired of coming home to a house full of strangers. I'm tired of the noise, the mess, everything." She rolled her eyes. "God, you're such a buzzkill. No wonder you don't have any friends." "This isn't about friends," I said. "The neighbors are complaining. There are families with kids next door, elderly people who can't sleep because of your noise." "Not my problem," Chloe shrugged. "They should move if they can't handle a little fun." I was about to really let her have it when the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Johnson from next door, looking tired and frustrated. "Michelle, dear," she said, "I hate to be a bother, but these parties, they're getting out of hand. Last night, someone threw up in my rose bushes." I felt my face burn with shame. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Johnson. It won't happen again. I promise." As soon as I closed the door, I turned to Chloe. "That's it. No more parties. I mean it." The next day, I got a call from Mom. I should have known Chloe would go running to her. "Michelle," Mom's voice was sharp. "What's this I hear about you trying to control your sister?" I took a deep breath. "Mom, it's not like that. The parties are out of control. The neighbors are complaining." "The neighbors?" Mom cut me off. "Who cares about the neighbors? Your sister is trying to make friends, to have a normal college experience. And you're trying to ruin it for her." "But Mom." "No buts," she snapped. "I won't have you interfering with Chloe's studies or her social life. Do you understand me?" I felt something snap inside me. All the frustration, all the anger I'd been holding back, it all came rushing out. "No, Mom, I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't live like this anymore. Take your precious Chloe back to Europe if you want, but I'm done being her maid and punching bag." I hung up before she could respond, my heart pounding. I'd done it. I'd finally stood up for myself. Just when I thought I'd finally taken a stand, life threw me another curveball. A week after my ultimatum to Mom, she showed up on my doorstep unannounced. She looked different, tired, worn down in a way I'd never seen before. "Michelle," she said, her voice quivering. "We need to talk." I let her in, my mind racing. Was she here to take the house? To drag Chloe back to Europe? Instead, she dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. "I'm sick, Michelle," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "The doctors, they don't think I have much time left." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "What? Mom, what are you talking about?" She went on to explain about some rare disease, using medical terms I didn't understand. But the gist was clear, Mom was dying. "That's why I need you, sweetheart," she said, gripping my hand. "Chloe, she's going to need someone when I'm gone. Someone to guide her, to be there for her. I need to know she'll have you. If you do, well, I'll make sure you're taken care of too. The house will be yours, free and clear." I blinked. "But, the house is already mine." "Grandma's will." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "As Grandma's daughter, I'm the primary heir. I could claim at least half the house if I wanted to." My head was spinning. "I need time to think," I stammered. Mom nodded, wiping away a tear. "Of course, dear. I'll be here for a couple of days. We can talk more." Those 2 days were surreal. Mom fawned over the renovations Chloe had done, praising her exquisite taste at every turn. I was silent, afraid to say something rude about it. But the weirdest part was Chloe's behavior. It was like someone had flipped a switch. Gone was the party girl, replaced by a perfect angel who helped with dishes and spoke in a sickeningly sweet voice. She even offered to make dinner one night, though I noticed she ordered takeout and tried to pass it off as her own cooking. Mom ate it up, literally and figuratively. "See how thoughtful your sister is," she cooed. "You two are going to be so good for each other." I wanted to scream. Couldn't Mom see through this act? But every time I opened my mouth to protest, I remembered Mom's words about the house. About her illness. Could I really risk losing everything? On the last night of Mom's visit, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Have you thought about what I said?" she asked, her eyes pleading. I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said finally. "I'll try for you." Mom's face lit up. She pulled me into a hug, something she hadn't done in years. "Thank you, sweetheart. You don't know what this means to me. I can go back to Europe knowing Chloe will be in good hands." The ink had barely dried on Mom's departure when Hurricane Chloe made her grand return. The following week, I got off work early and headed home, looking forward to a quiet evening. As soon as I turned onto our street, I knew something was wrong. The bass from some EDM track was so loud it made my car windows vibrate. I burst through the front door to find my worst nightmare come to life. The house was packed with people, drunk college kids, sketchy-looking older guys, even a couple making out on my grandmother's antique table. "Chloe!" I screamed over the music. "Where are you?" I pushed through the crowd, dodging spilled drinks and grabbing hands. When I reached Chloe's room, I found the door locked. Without thinking, I kicked it open. Chloe was there, tangled up with some guy I'd never seen before. They both looked up at me, startled. "What the fuck?" Chloe shrieked. "Get out." Something in me snapped. All the frustration, all the anger I'd been bottling up for months came pouring out. "No, you get out," I roared. "All of you. This party is over." I stormed through the house, turning off the music and shouting at people to leave. When they didn't move fast enough, I grabbed the phone. "I'm calling the cops," I yelled. "Anyone still here in 5 minutes is getting arrested." That got them moving. The house emptied in record time, leaving behind a mess that made my stomach turn. Chloe emerged from her room, her face twisted with rage. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she spat. "You're just jealous because I know how to have fun." Well, guess what? I got kicked out of college, so now I can party whenever I want. And there's nothing you can do about it. Something inside me broke. Without thinking, I grabbed her arm and dragged her to the front door. "Oh, yeah, watch me." I shoved her outside, then ran back to her room. I grabbed armfuls of her designer clothes and threw them out onto the lawn. "You want to party? Go party somewhere else," I screamed, my voice hoarse. By now, neighbors had gathered, drawn by the commotion. I could hear Mrs. Johnson's voice, saying something about how it was about time I stood up for myself. But I didn't care about the audience. I was beyond caring about anything. I was still sitting on the floor, my back against the front door, when my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered, bracing myself for the storm. "How dare you?" Mom's voice crackled through the speaker, shrill with anger. "Chloe just called me in tears. You ungrateful little reptile, after everything I've done for you." I cut her off with a laugh. A real, genuine laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. "Everything you've done for me?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "That's rich, Mom. Really rich." "Don't you take that tone with me, young lady," Mom snarled. "I'll remind you that I'm the rightful heir to that house. I can take it away from you with a snap of my fingers." I felt a smile spread across my face. "No, Mom, you can't. I talked to a lawyer yesterday, Grandma's will is ironclad. She left everything to me. Not you, not Chloe. Me. And there's nothing you can do about it. I heard Mom take a shaky breath. When she spoke again, her tone had changed completely. Now, Michelle, let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can work something out. If you take Chloe back, I'll make it worth your while. I have property in Europe, a villa by the sea, a vineyard. It could all be yours. I thought about it for a moment. A villa by the sea did sound nice. But then I remembered the peace I'd felt in the moments after I'd kicked Chloe out. The relief of finally standing up for myself. No villa was worth giving that up. Thanks, but no thanks, I said firmly. Grandma left me her savings. It's more than enough for me to live comfortably. I don't need or want anything from you. I hung up and immediately blocked both her number and Chloe's. As I sat there in the quiet house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I was truly free. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into cleaning up the mess Chloe had left behind, both literally and figuratively. I repainted walls, scrubbed floors, and slowly began to reclaim my space. One day, as I was chatting with Mrs. Johnson over the fence, she mentioned something that made my heart skip a beat. You know, she said casually, I saw some furniture at the flea market last week that looked just like your grandmother's old pieces. It was a shame to see it there, but I figured you must have sold it during the renovation. I thanked her and raced to my car. An hour later, I was wandering through the flea market, my heart pounding. And there they were, the grandma's old rocking chair, the bookshelf Grandpa had built, even the coffee table where I'd done my homework for years. I bought them all back for a fraction of what they were worth to me. The vendor looked at me strangely as I hugged the rocking chair, tears in my eyes, but I didn't care. Over the next few days, I transformed one of the spare bedrooms into a replica of Grandma's old living room. As I arranged the familiar furniture, hung the old family photos back on the walls, I felt like I was rebuilding more than just a room. I was rebuilding my connection to my past, to the people who had loved me unconditionally. Months have passed since then. The house is quiet now, peaceful. Sometimes, when I sit in Grandma's rocking chair, reading a book or just enjoying the silence, I think about everything that's happened. About Mom and Chloe and the life I thought I wanted. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt sometimes, knowing I've cut ties with the only family I had left. But then I look around at the home I've reclaimed, at the life I've built for myself, and I know I made the right choice.
My name's Sarah, and I've got a story to tell you. It all started when I was just a little kid, maybe 5 or 6. That's when my parents split up. Dad, his name's Mark, he couldn't take it anymore. Mom, Linda, she'd been riding his ass for years about not making enough money. Always putting him down, making him feel like shit. I remember this one time, Dad came home excited about a promotion at work. He was grinning from ear to ear, proud of himself for once. Mom just looked at him and said, "That's it? I thought you'd finally gotten a real job." The light just went out of his eyes. It was like watching someone deflate. So yeah, Dad left. Can't say I blame him now, looking back. But at the time, it felt like my whole world was falling apart. Mom, though? She saw an opportunity. Mom figured out pretty quick that being a poor, abandoned single mother could get her a lot of perks. At work, she'd lay it on thick with her boss. "I'm so sorry I'm late again, Mr. Johnson," she'd sniffle. Sarah was sick, and with no one to help. Mr. Johnson would pat her hand and tell her not to worry. Meanwhile, I was perfectly fine, spending the morning watching cartoons while Mom did her hair and makeup. Family gatherings were the worst. Mom would hold court, dramatically recounting how Dad had left us with nothing. I'd squirm in my seat, uncomfortable with the lie, but not daring to speak up. Even at that age, I knew better than to contradict Mom in public. What no one knew was that Dad was sending money every month. Child support, he called it. Mom would scoff when the checks came in. "Look at this, Sarah," she'd say, waving the paper in my face. Your father thinks this pittance is enough to raise a child on. Pathetic. I didn't know how much it was supposed to be. All I knew was that it made Mom angry, and when Mom was angry, life got harder for me. As the years went by, I started noticing things. Like how Mom would look at me sometimes, her eyes narrowing like she was seeing something she didn't like. Later, I realized it was because I looked too much like Dad. It brought back memories for her, and not the good kind. But she kept me around. I was useful, you see. The picture of the struggling single mom and her brave little girl was too good to pass up. It got her sympathy, special treatment, even some government assistance. Then, when I was about 10, everything changed again. Mom met Richard. Rich, successful Richard. Suddenly, being a struggling single mom wasn't so appealing anymore. No, now she had a new image to cultivate. The devoted wife of a prominent businessman. And I didn't fit into that picture so well. It started small at first. Mom would forget to wash my clothes, leaving me with nothing clean to wear to school. I'd show up in wrinkled, stained outfits, my face burning with shame as the other kids whispered and pointed. Then came the food situation. Mom would cook these elaborate meals for her and Richard, filling the house with mouth-watering smells. But when I'd come to the table, she'd frown. "Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't make enough for 3. Why don't you make yourself a sandwich?" I'd retreat to the kitchen, my stomach growling as I slapped together a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Through the door, I could hear Mom and Richard laughing, the clink of wine glasses a stark contrast to my meager meal. The worst was when she started messing with my schoolwork. I'd spend hours on an assignment, only to have it disappear the next morning. I'd show up to class empty-handed, stammering excuses to my teacher. My grades started to slip, and the teachers began giving me concerned looks. Through it all, Richard remained oblivious. He was always buried in his work, and when he wasn't, his attention was solely on Mom. She'd simper and coo at him, playing the part of the adoring wife. "Richard, darling, you work so hard," she'd say, massaging his shoulders. "You deserve to relax." He'd smile up at her, completely under her spell. "What would I do without you, Linda?" Things got even worse when Mom announced she was pregnant. Richard was over the moon, and Mom milked it for all it was worth. "The doctor says I need plenty of rest," she'd tell me, lounging on the couch. "Be a dear and tidy up the house, won't you?" I'd spend my afternoons cleaning while Mom napped or chatted with her friends on the phone. When Richard came home, she'd struggle to her feet, one hand on her barely there bump. "Oh, honey, I'm so tired," she'd sigh. Growing a baby is hard work. Richard would rush to her side, all concern. "Sit down, my love. Sarah, bring your mother some water." As the months wore on, I felt more and more isolated. At school, I withdrew from my friends, too embarrassed to invite them over. At home, I was little more than a servant, expected to cater to Mom's every whim. One night, as I lay in bed listening to Mom and Richard cooing over nursery designs, something in me snapped. I couldn't do this anymore. I needed out. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never dared to do before. I called my dad and told him everything. The neglect, the mind games, the constant feeling of being unwanted. Dad listened in silence, only the sound of his breathing telling me he was still there. When I finally ran out of words, there was a long pause. "Pack your bags," he said at last, his voice hard. "I'm coming to get you." The next morning, I woke up early, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. I had already packed my bags the night before, unable to sleep from anticipation. As I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, I heard Mom's voice from the kitchen. "Going somewhere, Sarah?" I froze, expecting a confrontation. But when I turned, I saw Mom leaning against the doorframe, a strange smile on her face. She looked relieved. "I'm going to live with Dad," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. To my shock, Mom's smile widened. "Well, it's about time," she said, her tone almost cheerful. Richard and I could use the extra space for the baby. Her words hit me like a slap, but before I could respond, I heard a car horn outside. Dad was here. Mom walked me to the door, that unsettling smile still in place. "Have a good life, Sarah," she said, practically shooing me out. As I walked to Dad's car, I glanced back. Mom stood in the doorway, looking frankly joyful as she waved goodbye. It was the happiest I'd seen her in years, and it was because I was leaving. Dad's apartment was small, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived in years. However, we wouldn't be there for long. Over the next few months, I watched in awe as Dad's business took off like a rocket. It seemed like every week brought news of a new contract, a big client, or an expansion. Within a year, we were house hunting in the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. The house we ended up buying was nothing short of spectacular. 3 stories of modern architecture, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a backyard that looked like something out of a magazine. My room was bigger than our entire old apartment. While Dad worked long hours managing his now booming business, I threw myself into making our big house a home. I learned to cook gourmet meals, filling the place with amazing smells. I kept things tidy, managed the household staff, even started a vegetable garden in our spacious backyard. As the months passed, I watched Dad's hard work continue to pay off. His business kept growing, and with it, our lifestyle improved even more. I transferred to the most prestigious private school in the city. On my 16th birthday, Dad surprised me with a car. Not just any car, but a brand new luxury SUV. "Now you can drive yourself to school in style," he said, tossing me the keys. "And maybe run some errands for your old man?" As I settled into my new life, I thought about Mom less and less. She never tried to contact me, and I made no effort to reach out to her or any of my maternal relatives. The wounds were still too raw, the memories too painful. Instead, I focused on my studies. Years passed, and before I knew it, I was graduating college with honors. As I stood on that stage, accepting my diploma, I searched the crowd for Dad's face. He was there, beaming with pride, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. This was what it felt like to be loved, truly and unconditionally. After the ceremony, Dad pulled me aside. "I've got something for you," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. He handed me a small box. Inside was a key. "It's for your new apartment. In the city center. Consider it a graduation gift." Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged him fiercely. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." It had been a few years since I graduated from college. My career was taking off, I had a beautiful apartment in the city, and life was good. Dad and I had settled into a comfortable routine of weekly dinners and long phone calls. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. The news came like a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. Dad was sick. Cancer. Advanced. The doctor's words blurred together in a haze of medical jargon, but the gist was clear: it was bad. From that moment on, my world narrowed to a singular focus: saving Dad. I took a leave of absence from work, moving back into his house to take care of him. Every waking moment was devoted to his care. I researched treatments, consulted specialists, tried alternative therapies. Anything that might give us a fighting chance. The months that followed were a brutal cycle of hope and despair. For every good day, when Dad felt strong enough to sit in the garden or share a meal, there were 3 bad ones filled with pain and nausea from the treatments. One evening, as I was helping him back to bed after a particularly rough day, he turned to me with a serious look. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to promise me something." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Promise me you'll live your life. Really live it. Don't let this hold you back." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was going to be fine, but we both knew better. So instead, I squeezed his hand and said, "I promise, Dad." He died 2 weeks later. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, telling him how much I loved him, how grateful I was for everything he'd done for me. The next few days passed in a blur. I felt numb, going through the motions of arranging the funeral. There were so many details to handle: the casket, the flowers, the obituary. It all felt surreal, like I was planning an event for someone else. I was at the funeral home, trying to decide on music for the service, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello? Sarah? It's your mother. I nearly dropped the phone. After all these years of silence, she was calling now? What do you want? I asked, my voice cold. I heard about Mark, she said, her voice softer than I remembered. I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'd like to help. With the funeral arrangements, I mean. I wanted to hang up. To tell her to go to hell. But I was so tired, so overwhelmed. And a tiny part of me, a part one thought I'd buried long ago, yearned for a mother's comfort. Okay, I heard myself say. You can help. As I ended the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just opened a door I should have kept firmly shut. But with Dad gone, Mom was the only family I had left. Mom arrived at the funeral home an hour after our call, with my half-brother Thomas in tow. The kid was about 13 now, gangly and awkward. I watched as Mom fussed over him, straightening his tie, smoothing his hair. It was like a knife to the gut, seeing her shower Thomas with the affection I'd been denied my entire childhood. What do you need me to do? She asked. Despite my reservations, I put her to work. To my surprise, Mom turned out to be surprisingly helpful, managing the catering, arranging the flowers, dealing with the endless parade of well-wishers. The funeral itself was a blur. I remember standing there, numb, as people I barely knew came up to offer condolences. Linda stayed close, her hand occasionally touching my arm in what I suppose was meant to be a comforting gesture. It felt strange, this sudden maternal presence after years of neglect. After the service, as people were filing out of the cemetery, Linda approached me again. Sarah, I know this might not be the best time, but I'd like to stay in touch. Maybe we could get coffee sometime? I stared at her, this woman who had made my childhood a living hell, who had been thrilled to see me leave. But she was also the only family I had left. Maybe, I said finally. I'll think about it. To my surprise, Linda kept her word. In the weeks that followed, she called regularly, her voice always tinged with concern. How are you holding up, sweetie? She'd ask. Is there anything you need? At first, I was guarded, giving short, non-committal answers. But as the days wore on and the reality of Dad's absence set in, I found myself craving any kind of connection. Even if it was with Linda. Our conversation started simple enough. She'd ask about my job, my apartment, my friends. But gradually, her questions began to shift. Your father's business, she'd say casually. I hope it's not causing you too much stress. Mark always worked so hard. I'd deflect, changing the subject. The truth was, I was still trying to wrap my head around everything Dad had left me. The company, the real estate portfolio, it was overwhelming. And something in me, some instinct honed by years of Linda's manipulations, told me to keep quiet about it. As weeks turned into months, Linda's hints became less subtle. Thomas is looking at colleges, she mentioned during one call. The tuition these days, it's just astronomical. I don't know how we're going to manage it. I made a non-committal noise, my guard instantly up. Another time, it was, Richard's had some setbacks at work. The economy, you know. It's hitting everyone hard. Each conversation seemed to circle back to money, to the struggles they were facing. And each time, I could feel the unspoken expectation hanging in the air. Despite my initial reservations, Linda's persistent displays of maternal affection began to wear down my defenses. Against my better judgment, I started providing small amounts of financial assistance. It started innocently enough, helping Thomas with his SAT prep courses, buying Linda a new laptop when hers broke down, even covering a month's rent when Richard's company went through a rough patch. You're an angel, Sarah, Linda would gush. I don't know what we'd do without you. Each time, I felt a warmth in my chest. Was this what it felt like to have a real family? Meanwhile, I threw myself into running Dad's company. I made his longtime deputy the director, staying on as the owner and reserving the right to make all important decisions. It was challenging work, but I felt closer to Dad every time I sat in his old office. As the months passed, Linda's requests grew more frequent and more substantial. What started as occasional help turned into regular expectations. The breaking point came on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. I was knee-deep in quarterly reports when Linda called. "Sarah, darling," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness. "We've been thinking. It's been so long since we had a proper family vacation. We found this amazing package deal for a European tour." I felt my stomach drop. "Linda, I don't know. It would mean so much to Thomas," she interrupted. "And after all we've been through, don't you think we deserve a little happiness?" Guilt warred with resentment in my chest. Before I knew it, I'd agreed to fund their trip. But it didn't stop there. The day after they returned, Linda was on the phone again. "Now, about Thomas's college fund," she said, her tone no longer sweet but demanding. "We'll need you to set that up right away. He's got his heart set on Princeton, you know." Something in me snapped. All the years of neglect, the emotional abuse, the manipulation, it all came rushing back. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "No more, Mom. I'm done." There was a pause, then Linda's voice came back, cold and hard. "After everything we've done for you? You ungrateful little scum. How dare you turn your back on your family?" I laughed, a bitter sound. "Family? You mean the mother who was thrilled to see me leave? The one who made my childhood a living hell?" The argument escalated quickly. Linda dropped all pretense of affection, hurling accusations and insults. I gave as good as I got, years of pent-up anger and hurt pouring out. "You're just like your father," she spat. "Selfish and cold-hearted." "Thank God for that," I shot back. "At least he loved me." The line went dead. I stood there, shaking, my phone clutched in my hand. The silence that followed was deafening. When the opportunity for a month-long business trip abroad came up, I jumped at it. A chance to get away, to clear my head. As I boarded the plane, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Maybe this was what I needed, some time and distance to figure things out. After a month away, I was looking forward to the comfort of my own bed. The business trip had been successful but exhausting, and all I wanted was to kick off my shoes and relax in my apartment. But as I turned the key in the lock, something felt off. The door swung open to reveal a completely different apartment. Gone were my carefully chosen furnishings, replaced by unfamiliar decor. A startled couple stared at me from the couch. "Who are you?" I demanded, my heart racing. "What are you doing in my apartment?" The man stood up, looking confused. "Your apartment? We bought this place a couple of weeks ago. From a woman named Linda, I think?" The world tilted on its axis. "Linda. My mother. No, it couldn't be." "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "I never sold this apartment. I've been out of the country." The couple exchanged worried glances. "We have all the paperwork," the woman said hesitantly. "Maybe you should talk to your realtor?" I stumbled out of the apartment, my mind reeling. My first instinct was to call the police, report a fraud. But a nagging voice in my head told me to confront Mom first. I needed to hear it from her. With trembling fingers, I dialed her number. It rang once, twice. "Hello, Sarah," Mom's voice was sickeningly sweet. "How was your trip?" "Cut the crap, Mom," I snarled. "What did you do to my apartment?" There was a pause, then to my shock, Linda laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you had just shared your wealth willingly, it wouldn't have come to this. You brought this on yourself, you know." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You sold my apartment?" How could you? I'll go to the police, You'll what? Linda interrupted, her tone suddenly sharp. Report your own mother to the authorities? Please. We both know you don't have the spine for that. The call ended, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, homeless and in shock. But Linda's smug certainty had ignited a fire in me. Without thinking, I hailed a cab and gave the driver Linda and Richard's address. I pounded on the door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Richard answered, his face a mask of confusion. Sarah, what's going on? I pushed past him into the house. Where's Linda? I demanded. She's out, Richard said, still looking bewildered. Sarah, what's this about? In a rush, I told him everything, the apartment, Linda's confession, all of it. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from Richard's face. But, that's impossible, he stammered. We don't need money for Thomas's education. I've already set aside funds for that. We stared at each other, the truth dawning on us both. With shaking hands, Richard began pulling out financial statements, credit card bills. As we pored over them, a horrifying picture emerged. Mom secretly took out loans, and now she is mired in debt. I had no idea, Richard whispered, looking shell-shocked. All this time, I felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. Richard had been just as deceived as I had been. As the full extent of Linda's deception became clear, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was fraud, plain and simple. I didn't hesitate. The moment I hung up with the 911 operator, a weight lifted off my shoulders. For too long, I'd been Mom's victim. Not anymore. The investigation that followed was brutal but necessary. Every rock overturned revealed more of Linda's deceptions. She hadn't just forged my signature to sell my apartment, she'd been living a complete double life. Credit card statements revealed extravagant purchases, designer clothes, luxury spa treatments, 5-star hotels. All hidden from Richard, all financed through a web of lies and secret loans. The trial became a media circus. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, hungry for every sordid detail. I hated the attention, but part of me savored seeing Linda's carefully crafted image crumble in the public eye. In the end, justice prevailed. Mom was found guilty on all counts, fraud, forgery, the works. The judge's words still ring in my ears. Mrs. Linda Harrison, your actions show a blatant disregard for the law and a shocking betrayal of your family's trust. I sentence you to 3 years in prison, with an order to repay the full value of the fraudulently sold apartment to Sarah Harrison. Richard, bless him, was shell-shocked throughout the whole ordeal. The day after the sentencing, he called me. Sarah, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I'm filing for divorce. And I'm seeking full custody of Thomas. After what she's done, I can't let her near him. In the aftermath, I found myself rebuilding my life once again. The apartment money was returned, and I bought a small house on the outskirts of the city. A fresh start. I threw myself into running Dad's company, honoring his legacy the best way I knew how. The work was challenging, but rewarding. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly standing on my own 2 feet. Thomas and I keep in touch. He's in college now, studying engineering with Richard's support. It's bittersweet, but I'm glad we have a chance at some kind of relationship. As for Linda, I haven't heard from her since the trial. I don't know if she's tried to reach out, and honestly, I don't want to know. That chapter of my life is closed.